In the vast tapestry of human history, there are moments, fragments of time, so strange, so unfathomable, they defy explanation. Secrets buried in the shadows of ancient civilizations, objects lost to time that hold untold powers, and events that seem to blur the line between reality and the supernatural. What if everything we know is just the surface, and beneath it lies a hidden world of the impossible? For the next 3 hours, we'll explore the world's weirdest, most baffling mysteries. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the unknown. The cold, damp stone walls of the Tower of London stand as silent witnesses to centuries of history, their weathered surfaces bearing the weight of countless untold stories. Beneath the shadows of its imposing battlements lies a mystery that has haunted historians and the public alike for over 500 years: the disappearance of the princes in the tower. In the summer of 1483, 2 young boys, Edward V and his younger brother Richard, Duke of York, vanished from the heart of one of England's most infamous fortresses, never to be seen again. Their disappearance would set in motion a series of events that would shape the course of history. The 2 brothers were the sons of King Edward IV, and their story, one of royal succession and political intrigue, began in a turbulent time. Their father had died suddenly, and young Edward V, barely 13 years old, was declared king. The young monarch and his brother were placed in the care of their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, later to become Richard III, who was appointed as the Lord Protector. But something dark loomed in the air as the princes entered the tower in April 1483. As they settled in, they were last seen together playing in the garden, yet after that, the world would never know their fate. Historical records suggest that, as the weeks passed, their appearances became increasingly rare. The official accounts from the time claim that they were never seen again after the late summer of 1483, but there was no official record of their deaths. No bodies were found, nothing except whispers, rumors, and theories. In the centuries that followed, many have speculated about their disappearance. Was it a tragic accident, a royal conspiracy, or something darker still? One prevailing theory suggests that the 2 boys were murdered, their deaths orchestrated by the ambitious Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who sought the throne for himself. If this was true, it would make the princes in the tower victims of one of the most famous political assassinations in English history. The suspicion that Richard III was involved became so ingrained in the collective consciousness that it permeated the literature and folklore of the time. Shakespeare immortalized Richard as the villain who would stop at nothing to seize power, including the deaths of his nephews. However, this theory is not without its challengers. Some argue that the princes were not murdered, but rather fell victim to the chaos of a political system teetering on the brink. Could they have died from illness or malnutrition, their bodies quietly disposed of by their caretakers to avoid scandal? Another theory suggests that they might have been hidden away, alive but exiled, to keep them out of the public eye. Their disappearance, then, could have been a tragic consequence of a family torn apart by ambition, fear, and power. And then there's the more recent, unsettling theory, one that continues to be debated by scholars: the possibility that the prince's disappearance was orchestrated by someone other than Richard III. Was there a hidden hand at work, a rival faction, or even foreign interests eager to see the power structure of England fall into disarray? Some have even speculated that the princes were not murdered at all, but instead were taken and hidden in a secret location, perhaps even abroad, where their lives were lived in secrecy, far from the prying eyes of history. What is most unsettling, though, is the fact that no definitive answer has ever surfaced. No one has ever been able to conclusively prove what happened to the princes in the tower. In 1674, the remains of 2 children were found buried beneath a staircase in the tower. But even after extensive examination, it was unclear whether these were the bones of Edward and Richard. Some believe the remains were planted, a macabre piece of evidence designed to end the mystery. Others contend that the boys may have never died there at all. As we look back on this cold stone fortress, it's hard to ignore the shadow that still lingers over it. The story of the princes in the tower remains an enigma, a riddle wrapped in the very fabric of English history. Were they victims of political intrigue, or were they simply forgotten in the shadows of time? What secrets remain hidden in the dark corners of this ancient tower? Perhaps, as time marches forward, the truth will one day come to light, or perhaps it will always remain a mystery, forever unanswered. We may never know. But one thing is certain: the whispers of the princes still echo through the halls of the tower, waiting for someone to unlock the final secret. As the echoes of the princes in the tower still reverberate across the centuries, we move from one chilling chapter in history to another, this time deep into the heart of 17th century France. In the small, quiet town of Loudun, a mystery arose that would bewilder both the devout and the rational alike. A mystery so strange that it would captivate the attention of both the clergy and the scientific community for generations to come. In the early 1630s, a series of events began to unfold that would become known as the Devil of Loudun possessions. The story centers around a group of nuns at the convent of Loudun, whose lives, and the lives of many around them, were forever altered by what appeared to be a series of violent, inexplicable possessions. But the tale doesn't simply end with the seemingly supernatural occurrences. It takes a darker, more sinister turn that blends religious fervor, political intrigue, and, perhaps most unsettling of all, the mind of one man, Urbain Grandier. Loudun, a quiet town in the Poitou region of France, was about to become the stage for a spectacle that would stir the imagination of all who witnessed it. The convent's nuns, under the care of Mother Jeanne des Anges, began to display behaviors so erratic and alarming that they were considered nothing short of demonic. These women, once devoted to their religious vows, were seen convulsing violently, uttering blasphemous words in strange tongues, and exhibiting terrifying strength far beyond the norm. Some claimed to hear them speak of visions of hell, demons, and Satan himself. The entire town was soon consumed by the fear that these possessions were the work of the devil. But what made the Loudun case so extraordinary was not just the nature of the events, but the role of Urbain Grandier, a charismatic and controversial priest in the town. Grandier was a man who seemed to embody both the ideals and the contradictions of the time. Handsome and eloquent, he was admired by many. Yet, he also made powerful enemies. He had a reputation for his outspoken opposition to the local religious authorities and was rumored to be involved in illicit relationships with some of the nuns. As the nuns' strange behavior escalated, the situation reached a fever pitch. Rumors spread that they were not merely suffering from possession, but that the devil himself had taken control of their bodies, and that Grandier was the one responsible. The accusations grew more serious, and soon the entire affair became a matter of public concern. Grandier was arrested, tried for witchcraft, and accused of having made a pact with the devil. His accusers claimed that through his dark magic he had summoned demons to possess the nuns. In a trial that became a spectacle in itself, Grandier was found guilty and sentenced to death. But was it really the work of the devil? The more one looks at the events in Loudun, the more questions arise. Could these women have been suffering from a mass hysteria, fueled by the intense religious fervor of the time? Were they simply manipulated by the powerful forces around them, forced into their roles as victims of demonic possession by the local authorities, eager to rid the town of Grandier's influence? Some historians have suggested that the nuns' behavior was a result of the harsh, repressive conditions they lived under. Monastic life was not known for its leniency, and the nuns were subject to extreme discipline and isolation. Were they simply reacting to the psychological and emotional pressures of their environment? Perhaps, it has been speculated, the nuns were suffering from a collective mental illness, such as mass hysteria or a form of psychosomatic illness. After all, the symptoms they exhibited, convulsions, speaking in tongues, and fits of violence, were not entirely unprecedented in religious settings. Others have questioned the role of Urbain Grandier himself. What if the truth lay somewhere between the accusations of witchcraft and the claims of innocence? Was Grandier truly involved in dark magic, or had he been a scapegoat for the town's political and religious struggles? It is known that Grandier had many enemies, not just among the church but also among local nobles, some of whom may have had a vested interest in his downfall. Was he the victim of a well-orchestrated conspiracy to remove him from power, one that used the fear of demonic possession as a tool to achieve that goal? And then, there is the most troubling possibility of all, the idea that there was something more, something darker, at work. Could it be that the events at Loudun were indeed the work of a malevolent force, something beyond human understanding? Were the nuns truly possessed, their bodies controlled by something supernatural, something older and more primal than mere hysteria or religious manipulation? As the trial of Urbain Grandier unfolded, many in the town and beyond were left to ponder the truth. Grandier's execution by burning at the stake in 1634 was brutal, but it did little to quell the fear that had gripped the town. The possessions continued, and with them, the questions persisted. What really happened in that convent in Loudun? Was it an elaborate hoax, a case of mass delusion, or something much more sinister? The story of the Devil of Loudun continues to intrigue and unsettle. The question of whether the nuns were genuinely possessed, whether Urbain Grandier was the villain or the victim, remains unanswered. And perhaps, in the silence of history, the truth will remain hidden, lost beneath the shadows of time, buried deep within the walls of that convent. As we move forward, we are left to wonder, what forces were at play in Loudun? And more importantly, are there still mysteries lurking in the corners of history that we have yet to fully understand? As we continue our journey through some of the strangest and most perplexing chapters in history, we shift our focus to the early days of European exploration in North America. This time, we find ourselves in the rugged, windswept shores of what is now Maine, where in 1607, a colony was established that would vanish into the annals of history, overshadowed by the far more famous disappearance of the Roanoke colony. Yet the lost colony of Popham, though largely forgotten, carries with it a mystery that remains as unsettling as it is elusive. The Popham colony was founded by English settlers who sought to establish a permanent outpost in the New World. Located on the banks of the Kennebec River, its site, with its rocky coastline and dense forests, seemed an ideal location for a new settlement. The Popham expedition was part of the broader English effort to claim land in North America and secure a foothold in the vast, unexplored wilderness. The settlers arrived with high hopes in August 1607, the same year that the more well-known Jamestown colony was established in Virginia. But while Jamestown would go on to become the first permanent English settlement in the Americas, Popham's story would take a very different turn. In its early days, the colony appeared to be on the verge of success. Led by George Popham, the colony set to work constructing a fort, building homes, and establishing trade with the indigenous Wabanaki people. But what happened next remains a mystery. By the winter of 1608, the settlement had begun to crumble. Supplies were running low, and food became scarce. Tensions with the Wabanaki, who had initially been amicable, began to escalate. Yet it wasn't just external pressures that took a toll on the settlers. It was also the internal strife and the sudden death of George Popham himself, which left the colony leaderless. After only 1 year, the colony was abandoned in the autumn of 1608. The survivors of Popham's ill-fated settlement returned to England, leaving behind their fort and the homes they had built, structures that would slowly be overtaken by the harsh New England wilderness. Unlike Roanoke, where an entire group of settlers vanished without a trace, the Popham colonists left behind a definitive record of their departure. But the question that lingers is this: what caused their failure? Why did this settlement, which was established with so much promise, dissolve so quickly? For centuries, historians have speculated on the causes of Popham's demise, offering explanations that range from simple logistical failure to complex conflicts with the indigenous people. Some argue that the colony was doomed from the start. The location of the settlement, while picturesque, was also inhospitable. Its proximity to the harsh winter climate of northern New England made it difficult for the settlers to survive. The food supply was inadequate, and the settlers were ill-prepared for the challenges of living in such a remote and unforgiving environment. Disease, especially scurvy, is often cited as a major factor in the colony's collapse, with the lack of fresh provisions and proper medical care contributing to the settlers' early deaths. Others believe the cause of the colony's failure may have been more political. In the wake of George Popham's death, leadership became fractured. The settlers had little unity, and the decision to abandon the colony was likely influenced by the absence of strong leadership and the absence of support from England. The colony was also financially supported by a joint stock company, which had its own interests at heart. It's possible that economic pressure and the failure to generate profits may have led to the withdrawal of resources and support from the English investors. The settlers, under increasing pressure from all sides, may have seen little choice but to leave. And yet, the story doesn't end there. What makes the mystery of Popham so intriguing is that it has often been overshadowed by the far more famous tale of the lost colony of Roanoke, another early English settlement that disappeared under far more mysterious circumstances. While Roanoke has captured the imagination of generations, the fate of Popham has faded into relative obscurity. But in recent years, historians and archaeologists have begun to ask, could there be more to the story than we know? The discovery of Popham's remains in the 1990s, buried beneath centuries of soil and overgrowth, has reignited interest in the colony. Archaeological teams have unearthed the remains of the fort, as well as artifacts that offer a glimpse into the lives of those who lived there. Yet, while the evidence has shed light on the colony's brief existence, it has done little to answer the larger questions that linger. Why did the settlers leave so abruptly, and was there something more to their departure than simply the hardships of colonial life? One possibility, though unsubstantiated, is that the settlers didn't leave voluntarily. Some have speculated that the colony may have faced a more violent end than is traditionally accepted. Could it have been abandoned in the wake of an attack or a conflict that forced the settlers to flee? There are whispers that relations with the indigenous Wabanaki were not as peaceful as they seemed at first, and perhaps the settlers were driven from their homes. Others point to the possibility of disease or starvation, but without a clear explanation of the sudden departure, we are left to wonder if the true story of the Popham colony may be far darker than we can imagine. As we look back on the fates of these early English settlers, the question remains, what exactly happened to the lost colony of Popham? Was it the result of bad planning, poor leadership, or environmental hardship? Or was there something else at play, something we have yet to uncover? Perhaps the mystery of Popham is less about the physical remains of the fort and more about the story we have yet to tell. Could new discoveries, lost documents, or forgotten memories unlock the secrets of this forgotten colony? Or will Popham, like so many other lost chapters in history, remain a tantalizing enigma, one of many unanswered questions that continue to haunt our understanding of the past? The mystery endures, and as we move forward, it leaves us with one final question. How many other hidden stories lie buried beneath the surface of history, waiting for the right moment to be uncovered? As we continue to unravel some of history's most puzzling mysteries, we journey into the treacherous waters of the 17th century, a time when European powers were vying for control of distant trade routes and the riches of the East Indies. One such ship, the Batavia, found itself caught in a catastrophic series of events that has remained the stuff of legend and intrigue for nearly 400 years. It was a tragedy that not only tested the limits of human endurance, but also left behind a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. In 1629, the Batavia, a massive Dutch East India Company ship, embarked on a long voyage from the Netherlands to Java, laden with valuable cargo. The ship was a symbol of Dutch maritime power, and its journey was intended to solidify the company's control over the spice trade. However, the Batavia never completed its intended voyage. Instead, it became part of a story that no one could have predicted. A story of shipwreck, survival, mutiny, and a haunting disappearance that would echo through the centuries. The Batavia was wrecked on the Abrolhos Islands, just off the coast of Western Australia, in June of 1629, after the ship ran aground during the night. Fortunately, most of the crew and passengers managed to escape the wreck, finding refuge on a cluster of small islands. The survivors were stranded on the remote and desolate archipelago, with little more than the wreckage of their ship and their wits to survive. What happened next is a tale of unimaginable human suffering, and of something much darker. In the days and weeks following the wreck, the survivors began to form groups, trying to make the best of their desperate situation. But it was the arrival of a few key figures, most notably the ship's merchant, Geronimus Cornelis, that would change the course of their fate forever. Cornelis, who had been a member of the ship's crew, quickly emerged as a charismatic leader, but it soon became clear that his intentions were far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. As the weeks passed, Cornelis began to manipulate and incite fear among the survivors, eventually taking control of a large faction of them. Using violence and intimidation, he executed a series of brutal purges against those who resisted his authority. Many were murdered, while others were left to perish in the unforgiving wilderness of the islands. The mutiny quickly turned into a bloody power struggle, with Cornelis ruling over his dwindling group of followers with an iron fist. Yet, as the months wore on, a strange shift occurred. As supplies dwindled, the survivors of Cornelis's faction grew weaker and more disillusioned. But more disturbing was the disappearance of several people, men, women, and children, who simply vanished from the islands without a trace. The island was small, its geography well charted by the survivors, and no one could understand how, in such a confined space, anyone could simply disappear. The disappearance of these survivors, who had been part of the group under Cornelis's rule, remains one of the most baffling elements of the entire Batavia disaster. Were they victims of the mutineers, their bodies hidden away in a dark corner of the island? Or did they vanish in another way, fleeing into the wilderness, or perhaps leaving behind something the survivors couldn't comprehend? Was it the cruel hand of Cornelis that sealed their fate, or was something far more mysterious afoot? As the months passed and the remaining survivors were eventually rescued, the story of the Batavia became one of the most infamous maritime disasters in history. The mutineers, including Cornelis, were captured and brought to trial. Cornelis himself was executed, and many of his followers were punished for their roles in the bloodshed. Yet, despite the trials and the eventual justice meted out, the mystery of the Batavia's hidden survivors remained largely unsolved. Were they victims of a brutal, calculated scheme? Or did they fall prey to the island itself, its isolation, its unforgiving terrain, and its ability to swallow secrets whole? Over the years, historians have combed through the records, piecing together the accounts of those who survived. Some have suggested that the disappearances were the result of further violence, with those who were seen as weak or unworthy of survival being eliminated by Cornelis's faction. Others have wondered if the survivors were simply lost in the wilderness, their bodies never found. However, no definitive answer has emerged, and the question of what happened to these lost souls remains open. There is also the eerie possibility that the Batavia's survivors may have met a more bizarre and unexplainable fate. Could they have been driven to madness by the isolation of the islands, their minds shattered by the horrors they had witnessed? Could some of them have fled into the wilderness, never to return, choosing a death by starvation or madness over the tyranny of the mutineers? Or is there a more sinister answer, one that has yet to be discovered? In more recent years, archaeological expeditions to the Abrolhos Islands have uncovered remnants of the Batavia, but despite these efforts, the full story of what happened to the lost survivors remains elusive. Could future discoveries provide us with the answers we've been seeking for centuries? Or is it possible that the truth, along with the bodies of those who vanished, is lost forever beneath the sands of time, hidden away on the remote, unforgiving shores of the islands? As we look back on the Batavia tragedy, we are left with a chilling sense of uncertainty. What happened to the hidden survivors of the wreck, and how much of their fate was the result of human cruelty, and how much might have been something else entirely? With every new theory, with every fresh discovery, we inch closer to understanding the truth. But for now, the mystery remains. In the quiet corners of history, the story of the Batavia continues to haunt us, a reminder that sometimes the most puzzling disappearances are not those of the many, but of the few, lost to the tide of time and human nature, waiting for answers that may never come. After unearthing the mysteries of the Batavia and its hidden survivors, we now turn to a different corner of history, one that unfolds in the shadowed streets of 17th century Italy, a tale that intertwines religion, power, and an inexplicable tragedy. Our story takes us to the town of Monza, located just north of Milan, where a scandal of the most unsettling kind took place. It is a mystery that has captured imaginations and raised countless questions, a story that remains as enigmatic today as it was at the time. This is the tale of the burning nun of Monza, a scandal steeped in intrigue, with more questions than answers. Monza, in the early 1600s, was a place where the spiritual and political worlds collided. The towering Monza Cathedral dominated the landscape, its spires reaching high above the city, a symbol of Catholic authority and power. The town's significance, however, wasn't just tied to its religious influence. It also housed the Iron Crown of Lombardy, a relic used to crown the kings of Italy, further enhancing the town's importance in the eyes of both local and foreign powers. But behind the imposing cathedral and the political intrigue that lay just beneath the surface, there unfolded a story that would forever change the course of Monza's history. At the center of this scandal was Sister Virginia, a young nun living in a convent associated with the cathedral. On the surface, Virginia was like many other women who had taken vows of chastity, piety, and service to God. She had dedicated her life to the church, as was the expected path for women of her time. But as often happens in history, what is expected and what transpires can be very different. Virginia's life in the convent, rather than being one of religious peace, became embroiled in a forbidden affair that would have far-reaching consequences. Virginia's lover was none other than Gian Paolo Ossio, a local nobleman known for his power, wealth, and influence. Ossio was a man of ambition, willing to manipulate and coerce his way through life, and it was he who seemed to have swept Virginia into a passionate, albeit illicit, relationship. The affair, though scandalous, was not uncommon for the time, Powerful men often sought the company of women in religious orders, and such affairs were, at least to some, just another part of the tangled web of power, influence, and desire. What is extraordinary, however, is the chain of events that followed their relationship. The secrecy surrounding their affair soon became untenable, and Virginia, caught between her religious vows and the allure of Ossio's world, found herself trapped in a conflict of both heart and soul. Some records suggest that, overwhelmed by her internal struggle and the shame of her actions, Virginia eventually attempted to break free from the suffocating grip of both the church and Ossio. Yet, her fate would take a tragic turn. In an act of desperation and what seemed like an attempt to both cleanse herself of sin and escape her oppressive circumstances, Virginia set herself on fire. She was found in the aftermath of this horrifying act, and at first glance, her death was immediately categorized as a suicide, an unfortunate, tragic end for a woman who had been driven to despair. But even in her final moments, there were anomalies that defied conventional explanation. Witnesses to the aftermath claimed that Virginia's body bore an unusual condition. It was said that her skin showed no signs of the expected burn marks. The flames that were said to have consumed her did not seem to have left the normal scars on her body. Was this a strange miracle? A sign of divine intervention, perhaps, meant to cleanse her spirit? Or, as some have suggested, was it something far more sinister, an unnatural preservation of her body, intentionally manipulated to create a particular narrative? Such strange details only served to deepen the mystery surrounding her death. What had really happened in those final moments? Could it have been a desperate act of rebellion, or was there something far darker at play? A calculated scheme to rid Virginia of both her guilt and her potential to expose powerful secrets? In the aftermath of Virginia's death, the public's reaction was swift and harsh. The church and local authorities, eager to suppress any further scandal, quickly labeled her death a tragic suicide, a story of a woman who could not reconcile her inner conflict. Yet the strange circumstances surrounding her body and the rumors that swirled around her relationship with Ossio were not so easily dismissed. Was Virginia's death really a self-inflicted tragedy, or was it the result of something more insidious? A crime of passion, or perhaps even a deliberate murder disguised as suicide? The involvement of Gianpaolo Ossio, the nobleman at the center of the affair, added another layer of suspicion to the case. Ossio was known for his ruthlessness, his manipulative tactics, and his desire to control those around him. Did he orchestrate Virginia's death, perhaps as a means of silencing her and protecting his own position? Or was there another motive at play, something more hidden and far-reaching, involving not just Ossio but other powerful figures of the time? As with many such mysteries, the true nature of Virginia's death was never definitively uncovered. Her story remained one of the most whispered-about scandals in Monza, and the questions surrounding her fate continued to intrigue and unsettle those who heard the tale. Was she truly the victim of a broken heart and an unshakable sense of guilt? Or was she the unfortunate target of a ruthless political maneuver, manipulated and discarded by those who held the reins of power? In the centuries since, historians and scholars have speculated about the exact circumstances of Virginia's death. Some have suggested that she may have been the victim of a form of psychological torment, driven to despair by the isolation and pressure of her religious vows. Others have pointed to the possibility that her affair with Ossio was more dangerous than it appeared, and that it led her down a path from which there was no escape. As we shift away from the shadows of 17th century Italy, we now find ourselves in a small, seemingly unremarkable town in the southern United States. Pascagoula, Mississippi, on the Gulf Coast, may appear at first glance to be a peaceful, typical American town. But in 1942, it became the center of one of the strangest and most chilling mysteries in the annals of American folklore. This is the story of the Phantom Barber of Pascagoula, a mystery that has remained unsolved for decades, leaving behind an unsettling trail of questions and suspicions that have yet to be fully explained. Pascagoula, nestled along the banks of the Pascagoula River, was a place where the rhythms of everyday life were not unlike those of other small towns in America during the early 20th century. The world was on the precipice of war, and the people of Pascagoula had their own concerns, facing the tension of World War II and the uncertainty that loomed over their future. But in the quiet summer months of 1942, something bizarre began to unfold. Something that would shake the residents of this otherwise peaceful town to their core. It started with something simple, something seemingly innocuous. A strange, unsettling series of events that unfolded over the course of several weeks. People began waking up to find their hair cut, or, more specifically, to find strands of hair missing. At first, these occurrences seemed like little more than an odd, isolated incident. But soon, it became clear that these strange events were no accident. Something, or someone, was responsible for these mysterious haircuts, and they weren't just limited to a single household or individual. Over the span of a few weeks, more and more people began to report similar experiences. The first victim was a young girl named Pearl Curran. In early July 1942, she woke up to find a portion of her hair had been cut off during the night. It wasn't the work of a barber, nor was it the result of a careless accident. The hair had been cut in a deliberate, purposeful way. At first there was confusion, and many dismissed it as a prank or the work of a misbehaving sibling. But as the incidents multiplied, it became evident that something far stranger was at work. In the days that followed, other residents of Pascagoula began to share eerily similar stories. More than just a few instances of missing hair. Whole locks of hair were found in unexpected places, often placed in neat piles. The cuts were always precise, and they didn't seem to be the work of an amateur. The townspeople began to panic. How could this be happening? Who would do such a thing? And more importantly, why? As word of the strange occurrences spread, suspicions grew. Who was behind these bizarre haircuts? And why was it happening to so many people in such a small town? Was this some kind of twisted prank, a new form of urban legend? Or was there something more insidious happening just beneath the surface? One of the most unsettling aspects of the mystery was the complete absence of any suspects. Despite the numerous reports, there were no clues, no signs of forced entry, no footprints, and no discernible pattern to the attacks. The townspeople found themselves gripped by fear, unable to make sense of what was happening in their own community. Were they being watched by an unseen force? Was the Phantom Barber someone they all knew, or someone from outside their town with a strange obsession for cutting hair? For weeks, Pascagoula remained in a state of uncertainty, with no answers emerging. Authorities were called in, but the mystery only deepened. Police officers combed through the town, speaking with witnesses, and yet no leads were found. Some believed that the Phantom Barber might be a local person, a disturbed individual who had slipped under the radar of the town's close-knit community. Others speculated that it might be a wartime prank, perhaps linked to the anxieties of a world at war. But each theory seemed to lead nowhere, and the fear of an unknown intruder continued to haunt the town. Despite the numerous efforts to solve the case, no one was ever caught. The haircuts continued, but then, just as suddenly as they had started, they stopped. By the fall of 1942, the incident ceased without explanation. The mystery surrounding the Phantom Barber of Pascagoula was left unresolved, fading into the shadows of history. But even after the final snip of hair, the questions lingered. What drove someone to commit such bizarre acts? Was it the work of a local who took pleasure in terrorizing his neighbors? Was it the reflection of a collective anxiety at a time when the world was on the brink of war, causing a kind of mass hysteria? Or was there a more bizarre and disturbing explanation? Could there have been something supernatural at play? Something that defies logic and explanation? Over the years, the Phantom Barber's story became a strange piece of local lore, often told and retold in whispers around the dinner table or at the local bar. Some believed the mystery was simply the result of an overactive imagination or the effects of wartime stress. Others insisted that the unexplained nature of the event suggested something darker, something that could not be fully understood. Various theories have circulated over the decades. Some have speculated that the Phantom Barber was someone with a psychological obsession, perhaps a person who could not resist cutting hair as a form of control or manipulation. Others have suggested that it was a simple prankster, or perhaps a series of pranks, played by someone who knew the people in town and wanted to see how far they could go with their bizarre antics. Then there are the more fringe theories, the ones that suggest the mystery of the Phantom Barber goes beyond what we can comprehend. Was it a ghostly figure, a manifestation of some unknown force in the town, or perhaps even the work of an outsider with knowledge of the area's secrets? The possibility of a supernatural explanation, however speculative, has never been completely ruled out. One of the most persistent questions surrounding the mystery is this: why did it stop? Why did the Phantom Barber suddenly cease his strange campaign, leaving behind only unanswered questions and theories? Was the motive satisfied, or was the phantom figure spooked into hiding, never to cut another lock of hair again? We may never know. As we step away from Pascagoula and leave this strange mystery behind, we are left with the unsettling sense that some mysteries are simply meant to remain unsolved. Was the Phantom Barber a man, a figment of imagination, or something far more inexplicable? The questions still linger in the air, unanswered. And perhaps, in time, the mystery will only grow more impenetrable as the town of Pascagoula drifts further into history, leaving us to wonder what secrets it may still be hiding. What drives people to commit acts like these? And what other stories, equally strange and inexplicable, are still waiting to be uncovered? As we leave behind the eerie mystery of the Phantom Barber of Pascagoula, we now journey back in time to the waters of the Atlantic Ocean, where a chilling and puzzling story unfolded in 1921. It's a tale that has left sailors, historians, and conspiracy theorists alike scratching their heads for decades. The disappearance of the Carroll A. Deering, a tall ship that mysteriously ran aground off the coast of North Carolina, is an enigma with a twist that, to this day, has never been fully explained. At the center of this mystery lies the sudden and inexplicable vanishing of the crew's logs, a crucial piece of evidence that could have provided answers to the questions that continue to surround the ship's fate. The Carroll A. Deering was a 5-masted schooner built in 1919, designed to transport coal between ports along the east coast of the United States. By the time it set sail on its final voyage, the ship was in good condition. Its crew seasoned, and its destination, Portland, Maine, was a familiar route for the vessel. But the ship's journey would never reach its intended conclusion. Instead, what happened next remains a haunting puzzle. In January of 1921, the Carroll A. Deering was found stranded on the shoals of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, its sails set and its crew nowhere to be found. The sight of a derelict ship, abandoned and unmanned, is not unusual in maritime history. Ships have run aground, suffered calamities, and been left to drift. But what makes the Carroll A. Deering story so unsettling are the details that followed the discovery. The ship was found in an almost surreal state, her sails still furled, her helm still in place, and no sign of a struggle or distress. On board, everything appeared to be in order, except for one crucial piece of the puzzle. The crew's logs were missing. The logbooks, typically filled with daily entries and nautical observations, were nowhere to be found. To add to the mystery, there were no signs of the crew having abandoned ship in a hurry. The ship's food stores were left untouched, and even personal belongings of the crew members remained in place. The only items that seemed to have been disturbed were the logs. In an age where record-keeping was vital to both navigation and communication, the absence of the crew's logs raised questions that have never been definitively answered. In the wake of the discovery, authorities launched an immediate investigation, but despite their efforts, the mystery only deepened. No distress signals had been sent from the ship, and no sign of piracy or violence was found. There were no bodies washed ashore, and no witnesses could provide a credible explanation for the crew's disappearance. It was as though the men had simply vanished into thin air. As the investigation continued, some turned their attention to the ship's final moments. The Carroll A. Deering had been spotted by a lighthouse keeper just days before it was found stranded, and according to reports, the ship was seen sailing erratically. It seemed as if the crew had lost control of the vessel, but there was no indication of why. The ship's log, which was essential for tracking the course and movements of the vessel, had gone missing, and with it, any chance of understanding what had gone wrong in those final days. Some speculated that the crew might have been victims of a mutiny. After all, the Carroll A. Deering had been experiencing some internal tensions, with reports suggesting that a few members of the crew were unhappy with the ship's conditions. But why would the crew have left the ship so suddenly, abandoning everything, including their own personal belongings? Was there something more to their disappearance? Something so terrifying that it drove them to abandon ship without a trace? Others considered the possibility of piracy. At the time, piracy was not an unknown threat along the East Coast, and it was conceivable that a pirate crew had overtaken the Carroll A. Deering. But again, there was no sign of a struggle, and nothing was stolen from the ship. In fact, the ship was found with all its valuables intact, raising further questions about the true nature of the event. There was also speculation that the Carroll A. Deering might have been the victim of a supernatural force. Some have suggested that the ship may have been cursed, or that some unknown force had driven the crew to madness. These theories, though more fringe, speak to the eerie nature of the disappearance and the absence of concrete evidence. As the years passed, many theories emerged about what had happened to the ship and its crew. Some believed that the men had simply abandoned ship, fearing some kind of disaster, perhaps a mechanical failure, or even the onset of an unknown illness that struck the crew. But this theory, too, falters in the face of the missing logs and the inexplicable calmness of the situation. Why would the crew leave the ship behind so abruptly, without a single clue as to what might have caused their decision? One of the more plausible theories, though still unproven, involves a possible encounter with the Bermuda Triangle. The waters off the coast of North Carolina, not far from where the Carroll A. Deering was found, are often associated with the so-called Bermuda Triangle, an area known for its mysterious disappearances and strange phenomena. Could the ship and its crew have been caught in some kind of unusual, unexplained event? One that caused them to lose control of the vessel and vanish without a trace? However, despite the passage of time and the persistence of these various theories, no definitive answers have emerged. The crew logs, a key piece of evidence, were never found. They could have been taken by someone with knowledge of the ship's condition, or perhaps they were simply lost in the chaos of the crew's disappearance. The fact remains, however, that the logs are missing, and with them, the answers to many of the questions surrounding the Carroll A. Deering. To this day, the mystery of the Carroll A. Deering and its missing crew logs continues to haunt those who are drawn to the unexplained corners of history. Was it a case of human error, foul play, or something more mysterious? The absence of the logs only deepens the enigma, leaving us to wonder, what happened in the final days of the Carroll A. Deering's ill-fated journey? And more importantly, what secrets are still waiting to be uncovered in the tangled web of this century-old maritime mystery? As we leave behind the chilling mystery of the Carroll A Deering and its vanished crew, we now find ourselves in a quiet, unsuspecting town in the mid-20th century. Mattoon, Illinois, a small city in the heart of America, was about to be thrust into a strange and terrifying set of events that would perplex its residents and generations to come. In 1944, the town became ground zero for an unsettling mystery that seemed to defy both logic and reason. The case of the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, a name that even now sends shivers down the spine, remains one of the most bizarre and puzzling episodes in modern American folklore. Mattoon, at the time, was a peaceful town, one of those quintessential small American communities where life moved at a slow, steady pace. Nestled in the southeastern part of Illinois, Mattoon was surrounded by farmland, with a population that had little reason to believe they would become embroiled in a mystery that would capture the attention of the nation. The story, however, would quickly unfold in a way no one could have expected. It all began in late August 1944. Residents of Mattoon started to report a series of strange, almost identical incidents. People began to feel ill and dizzy, often complaining of a strange odor that seemed to seep into their homes. They described the smell as chemical, pungent, or sometimes even sweet, but always overpowering. In many cases, those who encountered the scent would soon experience nausea, dizziness, and difficulty breathing, symptoms that suggested something toxic or poisonous was in the air. The first reports came from the evening hours, and by the time the sun set, fear had begun to take hold of the town. The most unsettling part of the mystery was that these gas attacks seemed to have no clear origin. The victims reported that the gas came from an unknown source, and in many instances, they saw no one responsible. The only clues were the strange odor and the symptoms that followed. Soon, rumors began to spread that a mysterious figure was at large, a person, or perhaps a group of people, who were deliberately releasing some sort of gas into homes in the dead of night. As the days passed, the reports continued to pour in. Over the course of several weeks, dozens of residents, primarily women and children, claimed to have been affected by the gas. Some victims said they saw a shadowy figure near their homes, or a person who seemed to be lurking in the darkness. A few even claimed to have seen a figure dressed in dark clothing, moving swiftly through the streets. Others described hearing a hissing sound, as if a canister was being opened. But despite these vague sightings, there was never a clear description of the assailant, or even a confirmed identity. The police were baffled. No evidence of any kind of poison, chemical, or gas could be found at the scenes of the attacks. The local authorities conducted their investigations, but the more they searched, the more questions arose. Could it have been a hoax? Was there something else at play? Perhaps an outbreak of mass hysteria, spurred on by the collective fear of a war-torn world. After all, the United States was deep into World War II at the time, and anxiety about enemy attacks, including chemical warfare, was high. But even the most skeptical investigators found themselves at a loss. Something about the case just didn't add up. Despite the official dismissals and the seeming lack of evidence, the reports continued. In fact, the attacks began to grow more frequent. Witnesses claimed to see the figure responsible, always a shadow, always a fleeting glimpse. The gas attacks, meanwhile, seemed to be happening with an almost calculated regularity. Could this be a coordinated effort? Or was it the work of a single, unassuming individual, someone who might be blending into the town without suspicion? The strange nature of the events, combined with the apparent consistency in the reports, led to a variety of theories. Some suggested that the gas might have been some form of chemical weapon, a byproduct of wartime experimentation perhaps. Others speculated that it could have been a more mundane substance like tear gas or some other industrial chemical, but the fact that the gas appeared without any obvious source made this theory difficult to accept. Theories about chemical warfare and biological experimentation didn't seem to fit neatly into the narrative either, as no evidence of any such experiments had been discovered. Another popular theory was that the attacks were part of a psychological campaign, perhaps an effort to incite fear and unrest in a small, vulnerable town. Some thought that the gasser might have been playing on the war-related anxieties of the time, using the terror of the unknown to create confusion. But that, too, seemed unsatisfying. Could anyone truly be orchestrating these bizarre attacks for such a nebulous reason? Then there was the idea that perhaps the Mad Gasser wasn't an attacker at all, but the product of a mass delusion. Could the gas attacks have been the result of some kind of collective hysteria, where the fear of an unseen enemy led people to experience symptoms based on suggestion alone? The theory was that once a few people began to feel ill, others may have been influenced by their stories, leading them to experience similar symptoms, even if no actual gas had been present. This theory, while plausible in a certain light, doesn't fully explain the eerie consistency of the reports or the strange sensations experienced by the victims. Despite the many theories and speculations, the case was never solved. The attacks stopped as mysteriously as they had begun. By the end of 1944, the Mad Gasser of Mattoon had disappeared, leaving behind a trail of questions, but no answers. The fear and paranoia that had gripped the town faded away, but the mystery remained. Decades have passed since the Mad Gasser's last reported attack, and the story has drifted into the realm of legend. But the lingering questions remain. Was it truly a case of mass hysteria, or was there something more sinister at work? Who was responsible for the gas attacks, and why did they stop so suddenly? Was it the work of a single individual with a strange agenda, or was there something else, something we may never understand, that caused the events to unfold? The Mad Gasser of Mattoon remains an enigma, one of the most bizarre and unsettling mysteries in modern American history. As with many of the stories we've explored, the lines between fact and fiction are blurred, and the truth may never be fully known. But in the absence of clear answers, the mystery endures, leaving us to wonder. What truly happened in Mattoon in 1944, and what secrets might still be hidden beneath the surface of this strange and inexplicable tale? As we move on from the haunting mystery of the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, we now find ourselves in the remote coastal waters of Sweden during the Cold War, where an eerie and perplexing sequence of events unfolded in the 1960s. This next chapter takes us to Roer, a small, unassuming station located on the shores of the Baltic Sea, where a strange and unexplained phenomenon began to unfold. The story of the Roer station signals is one of the most puzzling and enduring mysteries of the 20th century, involving cryptic radio signals, cryptography, and a series of unanswered questions that have left researchers, conspiracy theorists, and scientists alike scratching their heads. Roer itself is a peaceful area, with little to distinguish it from the dozens of similar coastal towns along Sweden's southern shore. The station, established in the 1950s, was primarily used for maritime communications and research, a small cog in the vast machinery of Cold War intelligence. But what began as a routine operation soon turned into something far more strange and unnerving. In the early 1960s, a series of cryptic, mysterious signals began to be detected by the station's equipment, signals that seemed to come from nowhere, with no clear origin, purpose, or explanation. The first reports of these odd signals came in 1965, when the Roer station's operators began to pick up a series of strange radio transmissions. Initially, these signals appeared to be nothing more than background noise or static, unremarkable at first glance. But as the days and weeks passed, the signals began to repeat in an unusual pattern. They were rhythmic, composed of regular bursts of sound, each one lasting several seconds, followed by a silence that lasted equally as long. The pattern was consistent, unnervingly so, but there was no apparent reason for it. Then, something even stranger occurred. The signals began to shift, evolving into more complex patterns. Some transmissions consisted of a series of beeps or pips, almost like Morse code, but far too erratic to be easily deciphered. Others seemed to feature a more continuous humming, almost mechanical in its tone, as if a machine somewhere was emitting the sound. But unlike anything seen before, the signals seemed to have no purpose or recognizable meaning. What made these transmissions so disturbing was their inexplicability. The signals didn't seem to fit within the expected patterns of known radio communications, whether military or civilian. There was no identifiable source. The Roanoke station was listening to the airwaves, but who, or what, was sending these messages? In the years that followed, the mystery deepened. More signals appeared, and their complexity seemed to grow. But despite the growing interest in the case, no one could offer a definitive answer. Was this some sort of classified military operation? Was it a covert communication from the Soviet Union, a Cold War espionage tactic designed to confuse and mislead? Or was it something even more inexplicable, perhaps a case of bizarre interference or a previously unknown phenomenon? At its most puzzling, the signals began to exhibit characteristics that defied simple explanation. Some suggested that they might be the result of atmospheric interference or some kind of electronic malfunction. Yet, no matter how much the engineers and operators at Roanoke Station attempted to explain the phenomenon, they could not replicate the signals using their own equipment. These signals didn't seem to fit the laws of physics as they understood them, and no technology seemed capable of producing such a mysterious series of emissions. The speculation surrounding the origins of the signals became increasingly complex. One theory was that the transmissions were indeed military in nature, possibly an encrypted code from a foreign power. Given the heightened tensions between the Western world and the Soviet bloc during the Cold War, it was conceivable that Rohr was receiving secret communications intended for intelligence agencies, but no one was able to trace the source. The signals were neither standard military codes nor anything resembling a message from known radio stations. Another theory, perhaps more speculative, suggested that the signals were the result of extraterrestrial activity. Given the enigmatic nature of the transmissions, long bursts of sound with no clear origin, some researchers began to entertain the idea that this might be a form of alien communication. Perhaps, they wondered, this was humanity's first encounter with signals from beyond our world. The radio waves emitted from Rohr seemed to fit a pattern that some believed could be consistent with messages from space, an idea that captured the imagination of many. However, there was no evidence to support this theory, and as fascinating as it was, it remained firmly in the realm of speculation. Yet, the mystery continued. In the late 1960s, as the signals persisted, it was suggested that the source might be something even stranger, a phenomenon created by a natural source, perhaps a previously unknown anomaly or atmospheric phenomenon. There were even reports that the signals bore a resemblance to certain natural sounds, such as the noise made by whales or other marine animals. But these ideas were quickly dismissed by the scientific community. The transmissions from Rohr, while strange, did not bear any resemblance to the sounds produced by biological creatures. As the years went by, the phenomenon of the Roanoke signals seemed to fade into obscurity, as mysterious events tend to do. The station's staff was replaced, and the area grew quieter. Some researchers still believed that the signals were a part of a larger unknown project, an experiment in cryptography or intelligence gathering that never came to light. Others argue that it was simply a case of misinterpretation, a phenomenon that was misunderstood in the context of a rapidly changing world. Today, the mystery of the Roanoke station signals remains unsolved. No conclusive evidence has ever been presented to explain the transmissions, Some of the original equipment that recorded the signals has long been decommissioned, and many of the logs from the period have been lost to time. The signals that once intrigued so many are now a distant memory, relegated to the annals of Cold War anomalies, their true source never identified. The enduring question, of course, is, what were these strange signals, and where did they come from? Were they the result of human activity? A covert military operation, perhaps, or a scientific experiment gone awry? Or did they originate from some unknown force, a phenomenon we have yet to understand? Perhaps the answers lie beyond the grasp of current technology, waiting to be uncovered when the time is right. The Roa station signals remain a tantalizing enigma, an unsolved riddle that lingers in the minds of those who remember the strange transmissions and continue to wonder whether they were merely a glitch in the system or something far more significant, waiting to be unlocked. The mystery persists, leaving us with one last, unanswerable question. What secrets might still lie hidden in the static of the universe, waiting for us to decode them? As we move from the strange signals of Roa Station and the cryptic anomalies of the 1960s, we now turn back the pages of time to an era steeped in both scientific curiosity and mysticism. The late 16th century, a time when the boundaries between science, alchemy, and the supernatural were blurred, gives rise to one of history's most mysterious figures, John Dee. A man of great intellect and ambition, Dee was both a revered mathematician and a scholar, yet his pursuits veered into darker, more enigmatic realms. Among his many works, none is more shrouded in mystery than his Spirit Diaries, a collection of journals that chronicled his attempts to communicate with angels and spirits. However, key sections of these diaries are missing, pages that are now lost to history, leaving us to wonder, what did they contain, and why have they vanished? John Dee's home in Mortlake, a quiet village on the outskirts of London, was where he pursued his most ambitious projects. His library was vast, containing rare texts on astronomy, mathematics, and alchemy. But it was Dee's growing interest in the occult that set him apart from his contemporaries. As the Queen's mathematician and a respected figure in both the court and academic circles, Dee's reputation was impeccable. Yet, by the late 1500s, he began to turn his attention toward a far more esoteric goal, unlocking the secrets of the spiritual world. With the aid of a scryer, Edward Kelly, Dee sought to commune with angels, believing that through these ethereal beings, he could uncover hidden knowledge that might grant him power over the natural and supernatural realms alike. It was during these years that Dee began his Spirit Diaries, a detailed record of his conversations with angels, conducted through Kelly's ability to scry into a crystal ball or a polished surface. These diaries, which spanned several years, were filled with intricate symbols, cryptic messages, and divine instructions, all seemingly given by the angels. But there was one key element that stood out. As the diaries progressed, certain pages, particularly those detailing the most profound revelations, vanished without a trace. What could have been so significant in those lost pages that their disappearance remains one of the greatest occult mysteries of all time? The remaining portions of Dee's diaries provide a glimpse into his strange world. The communications with the angels were not mere dreams or delusions. They were profound, complex exchanges, filled with teachings on angelic languages, the creation of magical tools, and predictions of future events. The Spirit Diaries reveal Dee's belief in the divine wisdom he sought, but they also depict a man slowly unraveling under the weight of his obsession. As Dee's interactions with Kelly deepened, so too did the enigmatic nature of their work. He began recording not just messages from angels, but also visions of divine and otherworldly forces, visions that seemed to be guided by the invisible hand of something greater. As the years passed, however, Dee's endeavors took a darker turn. His relationship with Kelly began to strain, and there were whispers that Kelly had his own motives, perhaps to deceive Dee, or even manipulate him for his own gain. Some historians suggest that Kelly, who was known for his own interest in alchemy and mysticism, might have fabricated the spirit messages to control Dee or extract secrets from him. But despite the questionable nature of Kelly's involvement, Dee's obsession with these celestial communications only grew, and the pages continued to fill with more and more cryptic revelations. It is here, amidst the intense and increasingly bizarre nature of the spirit diaries, that the disappearance of certain pages becomes most significant. The missing sections of Dee's diaries are not merely blank spaces or lost fragments. They are pivotal gaps in a tale of spiritual ambition. Many scholars and occult enthusiasts believe that these missing pages contained vital information. Some believe they were pages where Dee documented the true nature of the angels' messages, perhaps their prophecies or instructions about an undisclosed cosmic secret. Others argue that the missing pages might have included details about Dee's own growing paranoia, his descent into an obsession that may have clouded his judgment. Why were these pages removed? Or why did they disappear? Could they have been deliberately hidden, either by Dee himself or by someone else who wished to prevent the knowledge from being shared? Was the content too dangerous, too far-reaching, or perhaps too troubling for Dee to even acknowledge? The speculation surrounding the lost pages is as much a part of the mystery as the diaries themselves. Some theorists have suggested that Dee might have hidden the pages out of fear. As his work became more notorious, he faced increasing scrutiny, both from the church and from rival alchemists and magicians. His involvement in the occult world was controversial, and it is possible that Dee feared persecution or scandal if certain secrets were made public. Perhaps the missing pages contained records of experiments that Dee felt were too dangerous to reveal. Or perhaps they contained an overwhelming truth about the nature of the universe or his spiritual encounters, something that, once known, could not be undone. Another theory is that Dee himself may have consciously destroyed the pages. In some versions of his story, Dee is said to have grown disillusioned with the work, perhaps abandoning it out of a sense of regret or a fear that he was venturing too far into the unknown. Could the missing pages reflect a turning point in his spiritual journey, where he rejected the messages from the angels or realized the dangers of his pursuit? Yet, there are more speculative theories, ones that suggest the pages might have been taken by forces beyond Dee's control. Given the nature of his work and the many people who had an interest in his spiritual communications, it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility that someone else, perhaps an enemy, a rival, or even a secret society, interfered with Dee's records. Was there someone who sought to seize Dee's knowledge for themselves, someone who understood the power that these messages could contain? As the years passed, Dee's diaries fell into obscurity. In the centuries that followed, his journals would be dispersed across various libraries and collections, each page carefully preserved but with the gaps still haunting the records. Despite extensive research, no one has ever been able to locate the missing pages or reconstruct their content. Some of the journals were eventually rediscovered in the 18th century, and Dee's spirit diaries became the subject of intense interest among scholars of the occult and mysticism. But the missing pages, the key to understanding Dee's ultimate revelations, remain elusive. What secrets did they hold? Could they have contained the key to unlocking a deeper understanding of the mystical forces Dee sought to control? Or were they simply the ramblings of a man who had gone too far in his search for knowledge? The mystery of the missing pages of John Dee's spirit diaries continues to fascinate those who delve into the realms of the unknown. What truths are hidden in these gaps, and why have they remained elusive for so long? Perhaps the answer lies in the fact that Dee's work was never meant to be fully understood by his contemporaries, or by us. The missing pages may be lost, but the questions they raise are eternal. What would we find if we could read them? Would they shed light on a forgotten chapter of history, or would they open doors best left unopened? As we stand at the threshold of this mysterious occult gap, we are left to wonder, are the missing pages truly lost, or is the truth hiding just out of reach, waiting for someone to uncover it? As we leave behind the mystifying and elusive pages of John Dee's spirit diaries, we now turn to a case that is both unsettling and bizarre, a tale that seems to defy logic and challenge the boundaries of our understanding of reality. In the 1950s, an encounter at Tokyo International Airport led to a mystery that would captivate the imagination of the public and leave behind a trail of questions that have yet to be answered. The strange case of the Taured Man has persisted for decades, not merely as an oddity, but as a puzzle whose pieces still refuse to fit together. It begins in the summer of 1954, when a man arrived at Tokyo International Airport, carrying with him a passport that appeared completely legitimate, yet no one seemed able to identify the country of origin. This man, who, despite being described in numerous reports as being of European descent, had dark hair and an unremarkable appearance, had a strange story to tell. Upon presenting his passport at immigration, he was immediately questioned by officials, as the passport itself was from a country that didn't exist, at least not in any official capacity. The passport was marked with the word Taured, the name of a nation that had never been recognized by the global community. The confusion began almost immediately. The man, speaking fluent French and English, explained that he was from the country of Taured, a place located in Europe, somewhere between France and Spain. According to the man, Taured had existed for centuries, with a long history, culture, and even a currency. But for all his claims, no one at the airport had ever heard of Taured. There were no maps that contained a country by that name, no government recognition, and no diplomatic ties to any existing nation. When asked to point to his country on a map, the man reportedly pointed to the region between France and Spain, the very area where modern-day Andorra lies. Yet, he insisted that this was not Andorra, but Taured, a completely different country. Authorities were initially skeptical, assuming the man might be suffering from some form of mental illness, or that he might be attempting to pass off a forged passport. But the man's passport seemed genuine, with stamps and visas from various countries, and the immigration officers were unable to find any signs of forgery or deceit. Everything appeared legitimate, except for one thing. The country of Taured did not exist. Things took an even stranger turn when the man was detained by airport officials. He was placed in a hotel room under guard while authorities began their investigation. As the night wore on, an even more bizarre development occurred. When authorities returned the next morning to continue their questioning, the man had disappeared. His room had been locked from the inside, and there was no sign of forced entry. His belongings, clothing, briefcase, and other items were still present, but the man himself had vanished without a trace. It was as though he had simply disappeared into thin air. What followed was a flurry of attempts by the Japanese police to track the man down, but despite extensive searches, no one was able to find any trace of him. His passport, his belongings, and any record of his disappearance vanished with him. In the years that followed, various reports and theories emerged, but no one was ever able to definitively explain what had happened. The Taured Man became a part of folklore, a legend whose mystery grew with each passing year. Some believe that the Taured Man was simply the victim of a mix-up, a case of mistaken identity, or perhaps an elaborate hoax. After all, passports can be forged, and travelers with fraudulent documents are not uncommon. Yet, the man's passport was examined thoroughly, and it seemed beyond question. The details on the passport were consistent with official documents, and there were no signs of manipulation. So how could a passport from a non-existent country appear so convincing? Others have posited that the Taured Man's story may be a case of a man from an alternate reality or parallel dimension, an idea that has captivated the imaginations of those who believe in the possibility of alternate timelines or parallel worlds. According to this theory, the man may have accidentally crossed over from a universe where the country of Taured exists, only to find himself stranded in our reality, unable to return to his home. This idea, though speculative and firmly in the realm of science fiction, has been discussed among those intrigued by the possibility that the man's disappearance was not the result of human error, but of a break in the fabric of space and time itself. There are also those who have suggested a more psychological explanation, that the Taured Man may have suffered from a form of delusion, or perhaps even a dissociative disorder that led him to believe he was from a country that didn't exist. This theory is based on the assumption that the man might have simply invented the country of Taured as part of his own mental confusion. If true, it would explain his conviction and elaborate backstory, but it does little to account for the strange circumstances of his disappearance. How could a man suffering from a delusion simply vanish, leaving behind all his belongings without any trace of where he had gone? Other theories delve into the world of conspiracy, suggesting that the Taured Man was part of some covert operation, or that he was a figure caught up in some larger secretive scheme. Some even speculate that the man's disappearance was the result of a high-level cover-up, where authorities either helped him escape or erased all traces of his existence. Given the tension of the Cold War era, the theory goes, the man may have been a covert operative or spy, and the entire incident could have been a deliberate act of obfuscation, one designed to conceal his true identity and purpose. Yet, despite all these theories, the most haunting question remains. What happened to the Taured Man? Was he a victim of circumstance, caught in a case of mistaken identity? Was he the victim of some larger, unseen force? Or was he, as some have suggested, a man lost between worlds, trapped in a reality that wasn't his own? What makes this case even more puzzling is the fact that, despite numerous investigations and the growing fascination with the story, no concrete evidence has ever surfaced to explain what happened to the man or his passport. His disappearance remains one of the most baffling and debated events of the 20th century. The details of his story have become distorted over time, passed through the filter of legend, but the core mystery remains. A man with a passport from a country that should not exist, vanishing without a trace, and leaving behind more questions than answers. Could the Taured Man's case be the result of an elaborate hoax, a strange misunderstanding, or something far more extraordinary? The mystery persists, and as the years pass, the story of the man from Taured continues to haunt those who seek to unravel the truth behind his disappearance. Perhaps, like so many other enigmas in history, it is a story that will remain unsolved, its answers hidden just beyond our reach. As we move from the enigmatic disappearance of the Taured Man, we now venture into a tale that revolves around the quest for buried treasure, hidden codes, and a mystery that has confounded treasure hunters for nearly 2 centuries. The story of the Beale treasure begins in the early 19th century and centers around a series of mysterious ciphers, one of which has remained unsolved to this day. But, just as intriguing as the treasure itself, is the mystery surrounding the identity of the author behind the second cipher, the one that holds the key to unlocking the location of the treasure. The Beale treasure is said to be the hoard of gold, silver, and jewels hidden by a man named Thomas J. Beale in the early 1800s. According to the tale, Beale and a group of companions discovered the treasure in the Rocky Mountains during an expedition. Fearing that they would be attacked or robbed, Beale allegedly hid the treasure in a secret location in Virginia and left behind a series of ciphers in a box, which he entrusted to a friend named Robert Morris. In theory, these ciphers could provide the exact location of the treasure, if only they could be deciphered. The first cipher, which was eventually cracked, revealed the contents of the treasure: gold, silver, and jewels worth an astounding fortune. But it was the second and third ciphers that held the real mystery. The second cipher is believed to be the key to locating the treasure itself, but for over 150 years, it has remained completely indecipherable. The first mention of the Beale treasure and its ciphers came in 1885, when a pamphlet titled The Beale Papers was published by an individual named James B. Ward. In it, Ward recounted the story of Beale's treasure, the ciphers, and the promise of immense wealth for anyone who could solve them. The pamphlet included the text of the first cipher, which had been cracked by a local man named Edward H. Smith. Smith had used a common method of cipher breaking known as the book cipher, where a series of numbers correspond to words in a specific text. In Smith's case, he used the Declaration of Independence to decode the first cipher and reveal the treasure's contents. While the first cipher had been cracked with relative ease, the second cipher, much more complex and far more elusive, remained unsolved. It was this cipher that piqued the interest of treasure hunters and cryptographers for decades. The second cipher contains over 200 numbers, but despite countless attempts, no one has been able to decipher it. But beyond the code itself, a more mysterious question has lingered. Who was the true author of this second cipher? While Thomas Beale is often credited with the treasure's creation and hiding, the truth of his involvement in the creation of the ciphers is far less clear. Some have speculated that Beale might not have been the one to encode the second cipher at all. In fact, there is no direct evidence linking Beale himself to the second cipher. According to the records, Beale left the ciphered papers with Robert Morris, but there is no mention of Beale ever directly discussing the creation of the second cipher with anyone. It is possible that someone else, a third party with cryptographic expertise, could have been involved in creating the second cipher, leaving Beale with the task of safeguarding it. One theory suggests that the second cipher was written by someone with an advanced knowledge of cryptography, someone who understood patterns, mathematics, and the intricacies of code breaking. Could it have been a person in Beale's expedition who had such expertise? Or could the cipher have been crafted by someone who was in contact with Beale later on, perhaps in an attempt to keep the treasure hidden for a greater purpose? The idea that the second cipher's author might have been someone other than Beale opens the door to further speculation. Some cryptographers have pointed out that the cipher's structure is unlike any typical code used at the time. The complexity of the second cipher is much greater than the simple number-to-letter substitution seen in the first cipher. This has led to the hypothesis that the second cipher might have been part of a more elaborate, perhaps government-related scheme. Was it designed to protect the treasure not only from treasure hunters, but from discovery by authorities or rivals? Or was it meant to serve as a test of intelligence, a puzzle meant for those worthy of finding the treasure? Over the years, countless individuals have attempted to crack the second cipher. Cryptographers, mathematicians, and amateur sleuths alike have all taken their turn trying to decipher the code. Yet, despite the enormous effort that has gone into trying to break it, the cipher has held its secrets closely, mocking those who try to decipher its meaning. Some theories suggest that the cipher may have multiple layers, or that it is linked to a hidden text or document that is yet to be discovered. One of the more intriguing aspects of the mystery lies in the cryptic messages contained within the second cipher itself. Though no one has been able to definitively crack the code, certain attempts have yielded partial results. Some researchers have suggested that the cipher contains multiple levels of encryption, including references to various historical texts and codes. Could it be that the cipher is intentionally designed to confound those who are not aware of the historical and cultural context in which it was written? Another aspect of the mystery that has only deepened over time is the possible involvement of other individuals, perhaps even a larger conspiracy. While Thomas Beale remains the primary figure associated with the treasure, some believe that others may have been involved in creating the cipher. or perhaps in hiding the treasure. This raises the question: was Beale the sole author of the ciphers, or could there have been multiple authors involved in crafting this elaborate puzzle? Despite the continued fascination with the Beale treasure and the second cipher, there are those who argue that the entire story could be a hoax, a cleverly constructed tale designed to lure treasure hunters into a never-ending chase. Some even suggest that the treasure was never hidden at all, and that the ciphers were created simply as a riddle to perpetuate an enduring mystery for its own sake. But if that is the case, why has the second cipher remained unsolved for so long? And why does it seem to be so intricately crafted if it were simply a work of fiction? The search for the Beale treasure and the true identity of the second cipher's author continues to this day. As the years pass and new technologies emerge, some remain hopeful that the cipher will eventually be cracked. Others, however, have come to accept the mystery as one that may never be solved. Yet, the question remains: if the second cipher is real, what secrets does it hold? Was it written by Beale, or was it the work of someone else entirely? And if it was indeed created by a master of cryptography, what does that say about the treasure it protects, and the purpose behind its concealment? The Beale treasure continues to captivate the imagination of adventurers, cryptographers, and historians alike. Perhaps, just as with so many other great mysteries, the answers lie hidden, waiting for the right person to unlock them. Until then, the story of the treasure and the unsolved cipher will remain an enduring riddle, a reminder that not all mysteries are meant to be solved, and that sometimes the search itself is as fascinating as the treasure it promises. As we leave behind the puzzle of the Beale treasure and its elusive cipher, we now turn to an eerie tale that stretches the boundaries of belief and reality, a case that, in some ways, blurs the lines between the physical and the supernatural. It's 1817, in the quiet rural town of Amherst, Nova Scotia. The stillness of this small Canadian community is shattered by an extraordinary series of events, a haunting that would come to be known as the Great Amherst Mystery. This chilling episode, marked by inexplicable sounds, physical disturbances, and violent manifestations, would become one of the most famous poltergeist cases in history, captivating the minds of those who sought to understand the forces that lie beyond our world. The story begins with the Gross family, who had recently moved into a modest home in the village of Amherst. Life seemed ordinary at first, as the family settled into their new surroundings. But it wasn't long before strange events began to unfold. In the early months of 1817, the family began to hear odd noises in the night, knocks, raps, and bangs echoing through the house. At first, they attributed the sounds to the usual creaks and groans of an old building, but as the noises grew louder and more frequent, their initial assumptions began to unravel. Then, the disturbances began to take on a more sinister nature. One evening, as the Gross family gathered in their home, objects began to move of their own accord. Heavy furniture would shift inexplicably across the floor, and items such as plates and cups were thrown with such force that they shattered upon impact. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the haunting was the violent nature of the disturbances. The family's bedclothes were pulled off in the middle of the night, and the beds themselves shook violently, as though an unseen force was attempting to throw the occupants to the ground. The poltergeist activity was not limited to strange noises and flying objects. One of the most chilling incidents involved the Gross family's young daughter, who was reportedly struck by an unseen force while lying in bed. She was physically thrown out of her bed and onto the floor, a bizarre and terrifying experience that only deepened the mystery surrounding the case. The child's account, combined with the testimonies of the other family members, made it clear that this was no ordinary haunting. The events soon drew the attention of the local community as word of the disturbances spread. Neighbors and curious onlookers flocked to the Gross house in an attempt to witness the phenomenon for themselves. As more people came and went, the nature of the haunting grew even more bizarre. Witnesses reported hearing disembodied voices, and some even claimed to have seen an apparition, a ghostly figure that seemed to fade in and out of existence. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Great Amherst Mystery was the identity of the poltergeist itself. It soon became clear that the disturbances were not random or without purpose. The manifestations seemed to follow a specific pattern, and many of the incidents appeared to be directed at one particular family member, the Gross's daughter, Anne, who was at the center of the haunting. Over time, the entity responsible for the disturbances began to communicate through strange messages, scrawled on the walls in chalk or formed from the objects thrown around the room. The messages, when deciphered, were revealed to be accusations of wrongdoing, as though the spirit was seeking revenge or trying to communicate some unresolved grievance. So, who, or what, was behind the Great Amherst Mystery? Some have speculated that the events could have been the result of psychological or physical stress. After all, poltergeist activity is often linked to periods of heightened emotional tension, and Anne was known to be experiencing a difficult time in her life. Others have suggested that the disturbances were a result of subconscious energy or repressed emotions, something akin to what we might now describe as psychokinesis, where the mind unknowingly influences the physical world around it. Another theory is that the haunting was a result of local folklore and superstition, as the town of Amherst had a long history of tales about restless spirits and vengeful ghosts. Some have even suggested that the family's house was built on land with a dark history, perhaps even the site of a long-forgotten tragedy. Could the disturbances have been the manifestation of a spirit with a personal vendetta, seeking justice or revenge? Yet, for all the attempts to rationalize the events, there remains a deep mystery at the heart of the Great Amherst Mystery, one that has never been fully explained. The events were witnessed by many, and the descriptions given by those who were present are remarkably consistent. This lends a certain level of credibility to the notion that something truly extraordinary was at work. The haunting was not just a series of isolated incidents, but a sustained and increasingly violent campaign of terror that lasted for months. And while many attempts were made to uncover the truth, through seances, spiritual mediums, and even formal investigations, the answers remain as elusive as the poltergeist itself. Over time, the disturbances slowly faded, and the Great Amherst Mystery became more of a legend than a contemporary event. However, the case never truly disappeared from the public's consciousness. It has since been the subject of numerous books, articles, and documentaries, each attempting to dissect the mystery and uncover the truth behind the haunting. But the Great Amherst Mystery remains an enigma, a tale that raises more questions than it answers. What was the true source of the disturbances? Could it have been a case of mass hysteria? Or was there something more at work? Something beyond our understanding? If the haunting was indeed the result of a vengeful spirit, what was the cause of its anger? Was it a ghost from the past, trying to right a wrong? Or was it the manifestation of something else entirely? Something that defies explanation? Some have suggested that the case was an early example of poltergeist activity, a phenomenon that would later be studied by parapsychologists and researchers of the supernatural. Others point to the strange messages and the personal connection to the family as evidence of something far more complex than simple ghostly activity. The Great Amherst Mystery may, in fact, represent a rare instance of a haunting that wasn't just the result of a restless spirit, but a deep, unresolved emotional conflict that manifested in physical form. As we reflect on the mystery of the Great Amherst Mystery, one thing becomes clear. It is a case that remains unsolved, and one that continues to intrigue and puzzle. What happened in that small, quiet town in Nova Scotia all those years ago? Was it a genuine supernatural event, or a case of psychological and emotional turmoil? The mystery may never be fully unraveled, and the answers may forever remain hidden in the shadows of time. But the great Amherst Mystery serves as a reminder that not all mysteries can be neatly explained, and that sometimes the answers lie just beyond our reach, waiting for us to explore them further. What remains to be discovered about the haunting of the Gross family? And, more intriguingly, what other mysteries may yet be hidden in the annals of history, waiting to be uncovered? As we leave behind the strange and unsettling events surrounding the great Amherst Mystery, we now turn to a tale shrouded in silence, one that resonates with the stillness of history and the enigma of human behavior. In the 1700s, nestled in the mountains of Majorca, Spain, a story unfolded that would baffle those who heard it. A story that revolves around a group of monks, an isolated monastery, and an unspoken event that has never been fully explained. This is the case of the silent monks of the Charterhouse of Valldemossa. The Charterhouse of Valldemossa, or Cartuja de Valldemossa, is a remote monastery located in the heart of the Tramontana Mountains. Perched on a high hill overlooking the village of Valldemossa, this Carthusian monastery exudes a sense of serenity and quiet that seems to transcend time. Its thick stone walls and vaulted corridors, surrounded by lush greenery and mist-covered peaks, evoke a sense of isolation, a place where the noise of the world below is muted, and only the echoes of prayer and contemplation remain. It was within these very walls, in the early 1700s, that a peculiar incident would unfold, one that would go on to spark debates and intrigue for generations. In the midst of this peaceful, secluded environment, the monks of the Charterhouse were suddenly struck by an overwhelming compulsion to remain silent. No one knows exactly why it began or how it spread, but by the end of the decade, the entire monastic community had fallen silent. No words were spoken, no prayers uttered aloud, no sounds broke the stillness of the air. The monks communicated only through gestures, and even the bells, which usually marked the hours of prayer, were silent. The origins of this eerie silence are lost to history, but accounts from the time suggest that it was not the result of any formal vow of silence. The monks did not, as was customary in some religious orders, take a vow of silence as part of their daily discipline. This silence was not voluntary, nor was it a part of any monastic rule. Instead, it was something more profound, a strange compulsion that seemed to grip the entire community. Some reports even suggest that the monks began to experience a sense of dread, as if something unknown had occurred that had rendered them unable to speak. The most curious aspect of this silence was not merely the fact that the monks stopped speaking, but the sense of unease it created among those who witnessed it. Visitors to the monastery, including those from the surrounding villages, were disturbed by the monks' inability or unwillingness to speak. A number of travelers who passed through Valldemossa during this period described the monastery as being haunted by an oppressive, almost otherworldly atmosphere. The monks, once eager to greet visitors and engage in prayerful conversations, now moved through the halls in complete silence, their eyes hollow with an emotion that was difficult to name. Some local legends attribute this silence to the influence of a supernatural force, a spirit or presence that visited the monastery and imposed its will upon the monks. The area surrounding the monastery had long been steeped in folklore, and it wasn't unusual for people to speak of the ghostly apparitions that sometimes appeared in the region, or of strange omens that forewarned of impending disaster. Could the monks have fallen under the sway of such an influence? Could the silence have been a form of spiritual punishment or a reaction to something dark and unknown? Other theories suggest that the silence was the result of a collective psychological breakdown, a shared hysteria that took root among the monks. Some historians have speculated that the monks, living in the intense isolation of the monastery, may have become mentally and emotionally strained. The solitude, combined with the rigors of monastic life, could have created a collective sense of anxiety that manifested itself in the form of silence. But if this were the case, why did the silence persist for so long? And why did it affect every single monk without exception? The idea of psychological contagion, where one person's behavior or emotional state influences others in the group, is often invoked in such cases. Could the monks have been so deeply affected by a shared trauma or mysterious event that they collectively decided to stop speaking? Or was there something more sinister at play? A dark secret that had been buried within the walls of the monastery, something so terrifying that the monks chose silence as their only means of coping. One of the most compelling theories is that the silence was the result of a traumatic event, a catastrophe that left the monks in a state of shock. Some researchers believe that the monks may have witnessed something deeply disturbing, perhaps a violent event, a death, or a tragedy, that shattered their perception of reality and rendered them incapable of speaking. The silence, in this interpretation, could be seen as a form of repression, a defense mechanism that allowed them to shut out the horror they had experienced. If this were the case, then what happened within the monastery to induce such a reaction? And why has no one ever been able to uncover the truth behind this event? Despite the many theories that have been proposed, there is no definitive answer to the mystery of the silent monks of the Charterhouse of Valldemossa. The silence continued for several years before it suddenly ceased as inexplicably as it had begun. By the end of the 1700s, the monks returned to their normal routines, resuming their prayers and activities as though nothing had happened. No one ever spoke of the silence, and no official record exists that provides an explanation for what occurred. Some have suggested that the monks, having experienced a collective breakdown, simply returned to their former lives without any further reflection on the events that transpired. Others, however, believe that the silence may have been the result of some unspoken pact or vow, one that was not recorded in the annals of history, but that held deep significance for the monks who participated in it. As with many strange occurrences, the silent monks of the Charterhouse of Valldemossa have left behind more questions than answers. The eerie silence that took hold of the monastery remains one of the most perplexing and mysterious events in religious history. Was it the result of a supernatural force, a psychological phenomenon, or something else entirely? The truth may never be fully known, and the silence, in the end, may prove to be just another layer of the mystery that continues to linger in the stone walls of the Charterhouse of Valldemossa. What remains hidden behind the silence of those monks? What dark truth did they carry with them into the quiet halls of their monastery? And why did they choose to remain silent about it? Perhaps, like so many mysteries, the answers to these questions lie buried in the past, waiting for someone to uncover them, or perhaps they are meant to remain unanswered forever. As we leave behind the strange silence of the Charterhouse of Valldemossa and the monks who could not speak, we now turn to a different kind of mystery, a case that involves disappearance, intrigue, and the eerie blank spaces in our understanding of modern history. In 1953, a French diplomat named Félix Moncla vanished under circumstances that still haunt investigators and conspiracy theorists alike. What happened to Moncla, and why did he seemingly disappear into thin air? This is the story of the vanishing of Félix Moncla, a case that has puzzled the world for decades. The incident took place on the night of October 23, 1953, in the skies over the North Atlantic Ocean. Moncla, at the time an experienced French diplomat and Air Force officer, was aboard a radar plane as part of a standard surveillance mission. His plane was equipped with radar technology, and he was tasked with tracking unknown objects in the sky, a routine exercise in the Cold War period when tensions between superpowers were at their peak. The mission, on the surface, appeared to be nothing more than a mundane operation, just another night in the tense skies over the North Atlantic. But what occurred that evening was far from ordinary. According to the official records, Moncla's radar plane, a French Mirage, was assigned to track a mysterious, unidentified object that had been detected on radar. The object was moving erratically at high speeds, far faster than any known aircraft at the time. It was then that Moncla and his co-pilot locked onto the mysterious object, trying to make visual contact. This was when the unexplainable events began to unfold. Moncla's plane and the mysterious object exchanged positions several times, with the radar plane apparently closing in on the object. It seemed as though a visual contact had been made, as the aircraft's radar showed the mysterious object had been right on top of them. However, something strange occurred during that moment. The radar operator, who was tracking both the Mirage and the unknown craft, suddenly lost both targets from the radar screen at once. The air traffic controllers and ground radar operators were left stunned. Moncla's plane had simply vanished. In the moments that followed, confusion reigned. No distress call had been made. No signs of an emergency had been recorded. The radar operators had seen the plane and the unidentified object in close proximity, yet no wreckage or debris could be found. The search began immediately, but it would prove fruitless. Despite an exhaustive air and sea search in the area where the plane was believed to have vanished, no trace of Felix Moncla, his co-pilot, or his aircraft was ever discovered. The disappearance of Moncla and his plane was not only mysterious, but terrifying for those who understood the implications. The North Atlantic had long been a place of military tension, with the US and Soviet Union both monitoring each other's activities. In the 1950s, with the Cold War still in full swing, this region was already fraught with suspicions of espionage, secret military maneuvers, and covert operations. Could the disappearance have been the result of a foreign attack? A forced landing by a rival power? Or had something stranger, something otherworldly, occurred? The story, as it began to spread, took on an almost supernatural air. Speculation ran wild, with theories ranging from UFO encounters to secret government cover-ups. Some believed that Moncla's plane had been shot down by a UFO, suggesting that the mysterious object on the radar was an extraterrestrial craft, with the advanced technology necessary to make Moncla's aircraft simply vanish from both radar and visual sight. Others entertained the idea of secret weapons testing, with some speculating that a classified military operation, possibly involving experimental aircraft or radar technology, had gone awry. For years, the French government and military offered few answers, and some questioned whether they were withholding information about the true nature of the mission. The incident was treated as a classified matter, and the official reports contained little detail beyond what was already known. Moncla's plane had disappeared without a trace, and no evidence of what had happened was ever uncovered. The idea that Moncla might have simply crashed, or that the disappearance was due to human error, did little to quell the mystery. If an aircraft had crashed in such a remote and vast region, surely some evidence should have been recovered. But nothing surfaced. Not a fragment of wreckage, not a single scrap of the plane. As time went on, other theories began to emerge, some more grounded in reality than others. One such theory posited that Moncla's aircraft had been intercepted by a rival military power, either the US or the Soviet Union, whose aircraft may have forced Moncla to land or made the French radar plane disappear from the skies. Such an interception would fit within the context of Cold War espionage, where every secret military operation was seen as a potential game changer. But if that were the case, why the complete absence of wreckage? And why did the governments involved remain so tight-lipped? Yet another theory suggests that the disappearance was a result of experimental military technology. Could the French and American forces have been conducting covert tests on radar or aircraft systems that were not ready for public knowledge? This theory proposes that a malfunction of some kind caused the radar systems to malfunction, resulting in the disappearance of both the mirage and the unknown object. Yet, the complete lack of evidence and the eerie silence from both military and civilian officials makes this explanation seem inadequate at best. Then, of course, there is the more fantastical theory that Moncla's disappearance was the result of a close encounter with extraterrestrial life. The idea that the object detected on radar was a UFO is one that continues to capture the public imagination. Was Moncla's plane simply too close to an alien craft, causing it to be beamed away? Could the high-speed maneuvering and strange disappearance be evidence of an encounter with something far beyond our earthly understanding? The case of Felix Moncla remains one of the most enduring mysteries of the Cold War era. His disappearance is one of many unexplained events that seem to defy logic and reason, and it has sparked speculation and theories for decades. Despite numerous investigations and theories, no concrete answers have ever surfaced. The disappearance of Moncla remains a haunting reminder of the unknown, both in terms of the world's military secrets and the mysteries that lie beyond our comprehension. What happened to Felix Moncla that night over the North Atlantic? Was his disappearance the result of an accident, a covert military operation, or something far more extraordinary? And why, after all these years, does the mystery continue to haunt those who seek to uncover the truth? As with so many strange events in history, the answers may lie hidden, waiting to be uncovered. Or perhaps they will forever remain out of reach, lingering just beyond the grasp of our understanding. The disappearance of Felix Moncla is not just a missing person case. It is a question that continues to linger in the air, an unresolved riddle that beckons us to ask, what really happened that night? As we leave behind the chilling disappearance of Felix Moncla, we turn now to a case from the 19th century that has equally captivated those with a taste for mystery, one of poisoned intrigue, betrayal, and an enigmatic death that remains unsolved to this day. It is the strange death of Charles Bravo, a case that, over a century later, continues to stir both fascination and frustration. What happened to this well-known figure of Victorian society, and why did his death, shrouded in suspicion and speculation, remain unsolved? In the spring of 1876, in a grand house on the outskirts of London, Charles Bravo, a man who once seemed to have everything, wealth, status, and a promising future, was found in the grips of a slow, agonizing death. Bravo, a barrister who had recently married into the wealthy family of a renowned medical practitioner, appeared to be in the prime of life, surrounded by everything one could want. But that life would end abruptly, and his final moments would spark one of the most puzzling cases in British criminal history. The setting for this tragedy was the quiet village of Whitley, where Charles Bravo lived with his new wife, Florence, in a large, elegant house. The atmosphere of the place seemed calm and genteel, a far cry from the chaos that was about to unfold within its walls. Bravo had recently married Florence, a woman of considerable beauty and social standing, but there were complications in their union, chief among them Florence's previous marriage. She had been married before to a man who had passed away under mysterious circumstances, a connection that would later raise suspicions in the minds of those who knew the couple. On the morning of March 21st, 1876, Bravo was found desperately ill, writhing in pain. It didn't take long for doctors to diagnose him with poisoning, but the type of poison, the manner of its administration, and the identity of the culprit remained shrouded in mystery. Bravo's symptoms were unmistakable. He was vomiting and suffering intense abdominal pain, but his condition seemed to worsen with each passing day. He died a slow, agonizing death, one that seemed to drag on longer than it should have. It wasn't just the suffering that struck those around him, but the peculiar circumstances that surrounded his poisoning. Who could have done this? The answer seemed elusive, and suspicion quickly turned to those who were closest to him. The police, after an initial investigation, found several intriguing clues, most notably a mysterious vial of poison found in the house. It was quickly determined that Bravo had been poisoned with antimony, a deadly substance often used in Victorian times as a treatment for various ailments. But it was also a poison known for its ability to cause slow and painful death when administered in small, frequent doses. Despite the clear signs of poisoning, no one could determine exactly how Bravo had ingested the poison, and no one could explain why he had been poisoned in the first place. Could it have been a suicide? Some early reports suggested that Bravo had taken his own life, perhaps out of guilt or despair. But there were no signs of a suicide attempt, and this theory seemed far less plausible given the circumstances. Bravo's life had not seemed in danger, at least not in a way that would lead to such a drastic decision. So, if it wasn't suicide, who was responsible? Florence, his wife, became the most obvious suspect. She had a troubled history, and many who knew her were quick to point to her troubled past, including her first husband's mysterious death. Rumors had swirled that Florence had been involved in her first husband's demise, and that history cast a shadow over her marriage to Bravo. Was she seeking to escape her second marriage for a fresh start? Did she want to claim Bravo's wealth and position for herself? These questions lingered, and her actions in the days leading up to Bravo's death only added to the suspicions surrounding her. But despite these suspicions, Florence was never officially charged. The investigation into Bravo's death continued, but it seemed to go in circles. No direct evidence ever linked Florence to the crime. And then, as the weeks went on, attention shifted to another possible suspect: the household staff. But nothing concrete emerged to explain the crime. The mystery deepened as investigators turned to the curious behavior of some of the other individuals who had been in the house in the days leading up to Bravo's poisoning. One name that surfaced repeatedly was that of Dr. James Gully, a medical practitioner who had been treating Bravo for various ailments. Some speculated that Dr. Gully, who had a close relationship with Florence, may have had his own reasons for wanting to see Bravo dead. Was it a case of medical malpractice gone wrong, or was there something more sinister at play? As the investigation continued, theories multiplied, some more plausible than others. One particularly bizarre theory suggested that Bravo's death was the result of a jealous rivalry between Florence and a servant in the household. This theory, however, lacked solid evidence and was soon dismissed. Other theories involved medical negligence or the possibility of a long-standing feud within the family, but none of these could be definitively proven. Then there was the strange behavior of the household maid, who was reported to have been acting strangely in the days leading up to Bravo's death. Could she have had a hand in the poisoning, or was she simply a pawn in a larger game of manipulation? Again, there were no conclusive answers. As time went on, the case seemed to fade from public consciousness, leaving behind only a trail of unanswered questions. The mystery of Charles Bravo's death was never solved, and his case remains one of the most enduring and baffling unsolved crimes in British history. Despite numerous attempts to unravel the truth, no one has ever been able to definitively identify the poisoner. The question remains: who killed Charles Bravo? Was it his wife, Florence, seeking to escape the confines of a second troubled marriage? Was it a medical professional with sinister motives? Or could it have been someone from outside the family entirely? The answers, hidden in the shadows of the past, are still just out of reach. What we are left with are only theories. the whispers of a tragic event that still haunts those who delve into its depths. Perhaps one day, the mystery will be solved, but until then, the case of Charles Bravo's death remains an eerie reminder that some questions, no matter how many years pass, can never truly be answered. As we leave behind the troubled and mysterious death of Charles Bravo, we now venture into the heart of rural England, to a story that has inspired fear, speculation, and intrigue for over 160 years. This tale, shrouded in an eerie atmosphere, begins on the evening of February 8, 1855, in the small village of Exmoor, located in the southwest of England. It was on this cold winter night that the legendary Devil's Hoof Marks appeared, an inexplicable phenomenon that would leave behind a trail of mysterious prints, igniting fears of supernatural forces at work. Imagine a quiet village in the rolling hills of Exmoor, the kind of place where legends are passed down like whispers in the wind. The air is crisp, the earth damp with winter's chill, and the trees stand stark against the twilight sky. It was in this remote, tranquil setting that something strange was about to unfold. Residents awoke the morning after a particularly cold night to find their fields, farms, and yards inexplicably marked by strange hoof prints, those of an animal, but one unlike any that could be identified. The prints stretched across 40 miles of the countryside, leaving a trail that baffled farmers, villagers, and authorities alike. Some of the hoof marks appeared on roofs, others crossed rivers and streams, and in some places they seemed to lead nowhere, vanishing abruptly into the distance. The mystery of these devil's hoof marks became an instant sensation. The prints were unlike anything seen before, distinctive, almost unnatural in shape, and they were spaced perfectly in a way that seemed to suggest they were made by a single creature walking across the land. The most unsettling aspect of the marks was their apparent ability to appear in places where no normal creature could have traveled. They were found on rooftops, on the tops of haystacks, and across frozen streams. No known animal in the area, not even the most adept of hooved creatures, could have possibly left such a trail. Locals were quick to offer their own theories, the most prevalent being that the marks were the result of a visit from the devil himself. This idea was deeply rooted in the superstitions and fears of rural England in the 19th century. According to some reports, the marks were said to appear on the evening of a violent thunderstorm, with the strange prints seemingly appearing overnight. Such occurrences in this period were often viewed through the lens of folklore, and many villagers believed the devil had taken physical form to walk across their land. At the time, a number of witnesses were able to offer descriptions of what they had seen. Some claimed to have heard strange noises accompanying the appearance of the hoof prints, unsettling sounds of dragging hooves in the night. Others spoke of a distinct sulfurous smell that seemed to linger in the air, adding to the chilling atmosphere of the event. But as time went on, more troubling aspects of the story began to surface. It wasn't the hoof prints themselves that were the most puzzling part of the incident. It was what came after. Witness testimonies, especially those from secondary sources, began to vanish. Official records indicate that the authorities, including local law enforcement and investigators, had been unable to gather reliable evidence about the origin of the prints. While some primary witnesses reported having seen a strange figure on the night the hoof marks appeared, there was no corroborative testimony. Those who had come forward later became mysteriously silent, their accounts either retracted or ignored, and some key details, vital to unraveling the mystery, seemed to disappear entirely. The disappearance of these secondary testimonies has been a source of significant speculation. Why did they disappear? Were they suppressed by authorities? Were those who had witnessed the marks intimidated into silence? Or was there a more mundane explanation, such as simple memory loss or misinterpretation of the events? Some theorists argue that the sudden lack of further testimony was indicative of a deeper cover-up, perhaps a government or institutional effort to avoid the spread of fear and hysteria. The mystery surrounding the hoof prints deepened with time. As investigators attempted to trace the origins of the marks, they encountered even more peculiarities. For one, no footprints were ever found leading to or from the strange tracks, suggesting that whatever had created them did so without following any visible path. This led to even more outlandish theories, including the idea that the marks were made by some form of supernatural or paranormal entity. Despite the fascination the marks generated, however, no substantial explanations emerged. Various hypotheses were put forward over the years, ranging from natural causes like the misinterpretation of tracks left by wild animals or even the hoof prints of a very large animal. But none of these ideas satisfactorily explained all of the anomalies associated with the event. The prints were simply too varied in location, and their appearance too bizarre to be explained away by the hoof prints of ordinary animals, whether domestic or wild. Other, more speculative explanations ranged from the idea that the prints were the result of a hoax, perhaps an elaborate prank or a piece of theatrical trickery, though the widespread nature of the phenomenon and the fact that the prints appeared overnight without any clear perpetrator made this theory difficult to substantiate. Perhaps the most intriguing theory was one that suggested the possibility of a natural explanation for the events, though one that would still leave much of the mystery unsolved. Some suggested that the marks could have been caused by an obscure, now forgotten species of animal, a creature that once roamed the region but had since vanished without a trace. While this theory may seem plausible to some, it does little to explain why such strange and distinctive marks appeared overnight in so many varied locations. The most intriguing aspect of the devil's hoof marks remains the disappearance of secondary witness reports. Why did so many people who had claimed to have seen something fall silent, leaving behind only fragmented, unreliable accounts? Why was the official investigation never able to fully trace the source of the prints? Was it simply a case of mass hysteria, an urban legend brought to life by the imagination of those living in a superstitious time? Or could there have been something far stranger at play in the quiet hills of Exmoor, a phenomenon that defies our understanding of the natural world? As with so many great mysteries in history, the devil's hoof marks remain unsolved. Some questions seem destined to linger in the air, unanswered, forever. What truly happened in Exmoor on that fateful night in 1855? And why, all these years later, does the enigma continue to haunt us like a shadow that cannot be shaken? Perhaps the answers are hidden away in lost testimonies, concealed beneath layers of time and secrecy. Or perhaps they lie in the realm of the inexplicable, waiting for the curious to dig deeper and find the truth buried beneath the hoof marks. As we transition from the eerie and unexplained mysteries of the devil's hoof marks, we now find ourselves moving from the heart of rural England to the bustling industrial city of Glasgow. This shift in location marks a change in both time and context. Here, the mysterious remains far from the supernatural. Instead, we are plunged into a world of crime, competition, and intrigue, where a seemingly innocuous product, ice cream, became the battleground for a deadly war. Welcome to the Glasgow Ice Cream Wars, a shocking and often overlooked chapter in the city's criminal history, a story that has baffled investigators, captivated true crime enthusiasts, and left behind an unsettling gap in the historical record. The 1980s in Glasgow, Scotland, were marked by a rising tide of gang violence, territorial disputes, and a burgeoning criminal underworld. But in the midst of this urban chaos, one of the most unusual and shocking conflicts emerged. An ice cream war that seemed absurd at first, yet was anything but. On the surface, it appeared to be a fight over something as innocent as ice cream parlors. But as the violence escalated, it became clear that the true motives were far darker, involving extortion, control of territory, and an undercurrent of familial betrayal. At the heart of this brutal battle were a number of criminal families who controlled much of Glasgow's illicit activities. As the 1980s unfolded, one particularly notorious family, the Colombos, found themselves embroiled in a conflict with other groups over the lucrative business of ice cream vans. But this wasn't about selling cones or attracting children with colorful sprinkles. This was about power, money, and the dark side of Glasgow's criminal network. Ice cream vans, innocuous in appearance, became vehicles for extortion, money laundering, and, in some cases, violence. The story of the Glasgow ice cream wars begins with a series of violent incidents and seemingly unrelated murders. Initially, the public thought these were random acts of violence, perhaps fueled by drugs or turf wars. But as investigators began to dig deeper, they discovered that these murders were linked by a common thread: ice cream vans. Rival gangs began targeting each other's businesses, using the van operation as a means of generating income from extortion or drug trafficking, with the ice cream vans being the perfect cover for their activities. What started as a territorial dispute soon escalated into a violent conflict that left a trail of bloodshed across the city. In the midst of this mayhem, the true mystery lies not in the brutality of the war itself, but in the disappearance of key witness files and police records related to the case. During the investigation, numerous key witnesses came forward, but their testimonies seemed to have vanished without a trace. Reports of witness intimidation, silencing, and even potential cover-ups began to surface. Official files from the 1980s, including those from law enforcement agencies and criminal investigations, went missing or became mysteriously incomplete. The Glasgow ice cream wars had claimed more than lives. It had taken with it critical evidence, leaving holes in the story that have never been fully explained. What happened to these files? Why were critical witnesses unable to speak out? And how was it that the Glasgow criminal underworld had managed to exert such control over law enforcement, so much so that these records, these vital pieces of history, were either lost or destroyed? It's as if the powers that be were keen to ensure that the full story of the ice cream wars was buried, and perhaps for good reason. The disappearance of the witness files suggests that something much larger than an ice cream dispute was at play. Were authorities complicit in the cover-up? Or did the missing files point to a greater conspiracy, one that stretched further into the underworld than anyone was willing to admit? The conflict itself is, by now, well known. Rival families, namely the Colombos and the nearby Cusicks, fought for control of the ice cream vans, using them to launder money and push drugs. The violence escalated to such an extent that multiple murders took place, and families were torn apart. Yet the missing files cast a pall over the whole case. Could some of those who lived through the terror have been too afraid to speak up, too terrified of retribution to provide the full extent of what they knew? What if the war itself was not just about turf? What if it was also a way of manipulating the community, keeping them silent and divided? Some, of course, have speculated that the disappearing files were a result of incompetence or simple bureaucratic failure. Given the chaotic nature of the 1980s, with Glasgow caught between organized crime and an overwhelmed police force, it's not unreasonable to think that such an important investigation might have suffered from disorganization. But the question remains, how did these files just vanish? Could there be more sinister forces at work? Forces determined to protect the city's criminal elite? In fact, some theories go further and suggest that the events of the ice cream wars may have been orchestrated by a small group of influential individuals who had far more to gain from the war's chaos than anyone could have imagined. Was this a battle over ice cream? Or was it a means of masking an even more elaborate scheme, one of financial corruption, political collusion, and manipulation? There are those who believe that the tensions between the rival gangs were merely a smokescreen for something larger, and that those at the top, both in criminal circles and beyond, had much more to hide than a simple turf war. This raises yet another unsettling possibility. Could the missing witness files be part of an intentional cover-up that reaches beyond the criminal underworld, perhaps into the corridors of power? Perhaps even more unsettling is the notion that the loss of these records and the suppression of testimonies was intentional, designed to protect not just criminal syndicates, but individuals in positions of authority. Those who were meant to investigate the war may have been intentionally obstructed, either out of fear or complicity. If this were the case, then the mystery deepens further. The public never truly got a full picture of the extent of violence and betrayal that defined the ice cream wars. Who could have known the true toll of these events? And what of the witnesses? Some of them disappeared entirely from the records, never to be heard from again. Were they silenced permanently, or did they simply vanish into the obscurity that often accompanies unresolved crimes? What happened to those who dared to speak out? As with so many mysteries of history, the truth remains elusive. The Glasgow ice cream wars, for all their bloody violence, could yet hold a deeper truth about the forces at work in a city struggling with its own demons. But as we peer deeper into this unsettling story, one question lingers. Will the missing witness files ever resurface? And perhaps more importantly, what secrets might they reveal if they do? The answers to these questions remain hidden, waiting to be uncovered, or forever lost to the pages of a dark and forgotten chapter of Glasgow's past. As we move forward from the strange and unsettling events of the Glasgow ice cream wars, we now turn our attention to a mystery that, though rooted in a different time and place, also defies clear explanation. This next chapter in our journey takes us to the rolling countryside of Wiltshire, England, where a quiet village called Warminster became the epicenter of one of the most bizarre and unexplained phenomena of the 1960s, the Mysterious Lights of Warminster. Nestled beneath the sweeping hills of Salisbury Plain, Warminster appears, on the surface, to be a quintessential rural English village. The kind of place where life moves at a slow, peaceful pace, and the most exciting events might be the occasional visit to a local pub or the annual flower show. Yet, between the years of 1964 and 1967, this otherwise unremarkable corner of the world became the focal point of an extraordinary series of incidents. Events so peculiar and inexplicable that they would leave a lasting imprint on the town's history and fuel decades of speculation. It all began on the evening of August 19th, 1964, when a local man, a teacher by the name of Anthony Topping, was walking near the outskirts of Warminster. As he looked up at the sky, he noticed something that stopped him in his tracks. Bright, luminous objects, moving across the sky in a way that defied conventional explanation. The lights, he later reported, appeared to be hovering, darting erratically, and then vanishing into thin air. Topping, puzzled and somewhat alarmed, rushed to tell his friends and family. But this would not be an isolated sighting. Over the next few months, similar reports began to trickle in, coming from different people in the village. Each described seeing strange lights in the sky, flashes of bright, erratic lights, or glowing orbs that seemed to move with a mind of their own. Soon, the sightings escalated in frequency and intensity. Locals began to speak of not just strange lights in the sky, but unusual sounds, unexplained hums, loud bangs, and even sonic booms that seemed to accompany the lights. Farmers in the area claimed to have heard loud, deafening noises coming from the sky, while others spoke of a sense of unease, as though something unseen was moving above them. Witnesses also began reporting strange vibrations and a heightened sense of fear or anxiety during these episodes. One of the most striking aspects of these reports was the sheer consistency with which the lights appeared. They weren't sporadic or one-off occurrences. They were regular, almost nightly events. For some, it became a haunting experience. The phenomenon became so prominent that by the mid-1960s, Warminster had earned an odd reputation. This small, quiet village had become the unofficial UFO capital of the UK. The mystery deepened when a number of other witnesses, some of them with no previous interest in the supernatural, came forward with accounts that mirrored one another. There were descriptions of objects that seemed to hover and zip across the sky at impossible speeds, disappearing into the distance before anyone could get a good look. Some described a glowing sphere, others a pulsating beam of light. For some, the lights appeared to hover for hours in the night sky, unchanging in their position, before suddenly vanishing. But it wasn't just the lights themselves that captured people's attention, it was the sensation that came with them. Several witnesses reported feeling a strange, almost physical pressure when the lights appeared, as though the air itself was charged with energy. Others described strange, unsettling feelings of being watched, as though unseen eyes were observing their every move. Some even spoke of hearing a high-pitched ringing sound in their ears, while others felt disoriented or dizzy during or after the sightings. These experiences often left people feeling uneasy, as though something inexplicable had just brushed against the edges of their reality. As the reports grew, the local authorities in Warminster initially dismissed the phenomenon as nothing more than a collective imagination running wild. But as the number of sightings continued to grow, and as more and more people, some of whom were highly skeptical of supernatural or extraterrestrial explanations, came forward with their own accounts, the story began to take on a more serious tone. News outlets caught wind of the unusual reports, and Warminster soon became a media sensation. It wasn't long before the story of the strange lights reached national headlines. UFO enthusiasts, conspiracy theorists, and even curious tourists began to flock to Warminster, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious lights for themselves. But despite the growing interest, the mystery surrounding the lights of Warminster remained unsolved. Was this a case of mass hysteria? Was there a rational explanation for the phenomenon that had eluded both locals and investigators? Or was something more otherworldly at play in the skies above Wiltshire? Some theorists suggested that the lights were simply a series of misidentified natural phenomena, meteorological occurrences, atmospheric conditions, or the reflection of lights from nearby towns. Others speculated that the lights might have been military aircraft or experimental technology being tested by the British government. But these explanations, while plausible, did little to account for the sheer variety of experiences and the ongoing nature of the sightings. No single explanation seemed to fit all the accounts. There was something deeply anomalous about the phenomenon that continued to defy traditional explanation. The media frenzy surrounding the lights only added fuel to the fire. While some of the reports came from reliable, level-headed individuals, others began to border on the sensational. As often happens in cases like this, the line between genuine reports and exaggerated tales became blurred. Still, the sheer volume of eyewitness testimony, spread over years with no clear end in sight, continued to haunt the town and fuel the mystery. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of the Warminster lights was the persistent feeling of something unexplained. Witnesses spoke of the lights in almost spiritual terms. For some, seeing the lights felt like an encounter with the unknown, something that transcended the ordinary, something that stirred a primal sense of wonder and fear. Others described the lights as malevolent, as though they were not simply an optical illusion or weather-related phenomenon, but a deliberate act, an intelligence, perhaps even an invitation, lingering in the sky. And then, just as suddenly as they had begun, the lights started to fade. By the late 1960s, sightings began to decrease in frequency. The last major report came in 1967, after which the phenomenon seemed to dissipate, leaving behind only a lingering sense of uncertainty. Theories came and went, but no conclusive answers emerged. Today, The mystery of the Warminster lights remains largely unresolved. The village itself has settled back into quiet obscurity, but the story of those strange events still lingers in the collective memory of those who experienced them and those who continue to investigate them. For some, the mystery is just another curious footnote in the annals of the unexplained, a tale of strange lights that flickered and vanished without offering any answers. But perhaps the most intriguing question of all is one that still resonates today. What if the lights weren't just an anomaly? What if they were a message, something deliberately placed in the sky for those with the eyes to see it? Something that remains hidden, just beyond our understanding. The lights of Warminster may have vanished from the sky, but the mystery they left behind continues to haunt the town, and anyone who dares to ponder what still remains unknown in the dark skies above us. As we move from the peculiar events in Warminster to another shadowy mystery, we find ourselves transported to the cold and often somber landscapes of Norway. It is here, in the dark recesses of a remote valley in the western part of the country, that the eerie case of the Isdal woman has captured the imagination of investigators and true crime enthusiasts alike for decades. The year is 1970. A body is discovered in the Isdalen Valley, not far from the city of Bergen. At first glance, it seems to be a simple case of a tragic death. But as the investigation unfolds, it becomes clear that this is anything but ordinary. The woman, found burned beyond recognition, her face disfigured and unidentifiable, seemed to have appeared from nowhere. There were no clues about her origins, no identification, and no witnesses who could shed light on her life. Her story would be written not with the facts of her identity, but with the shadows of unanswered questions. The mystery of the Isdal woman has haunted investigators ever since, and the circumstances of her death have become one of the most chilling unsolved cases in Norwegian history. The Isdalen Valley itself is as mysterious as the case it houses. Nestled between towering, snow-capped peaks and dense forests, the valley is an area of stark, rugged beauty. It's a place where the air is thick with the scent of pine, and the earth beneath is cold and unforgiving. On that fateful day in November of 1970, hikers stumbled upon the body of a woman in this desolate landscape. Her body was found lying on the ground, surrounded by burned patches of earth, and her personal belongings were scattered nearby. At first, investigators were unsure whether this was a suicide, an accident, or something more sinister. What was immediately puzzling, though, was that there was no identification on the woman's body. The clothes she wore had labels deliberately cut out, further complicating the identification process. A notebook found nearby contained cryptic notations, adding another layer of intrigue to the mystery. One of the strangest discoveries was a set of keys to hotel rooms in several cities across Norway and other countries, some of which had been booked under false names. These strange details raised more questions than answers. Who was this woman? What was she doing in the Isdalen Valley? And why had she taken such elaborate steps to conceal her identity? The more investigators dug into the woman's background, the stranger the case became. The woman had stayed in multiple hotels across Norway, often changing her name or using aliases. She was also seen frequently with men, who were never identified. In fact, some of the hotel staff described the woman as secretive and distant, almost as if she was hiding something. There were even rumors that she had been accompanied by a mysterious man during her travels, but no one could definitively identify him. One of the most baffling aspects of the case was the state of her body. The woman had been burned in an apparent attempt to destroy any evidence of her identity. However, there were inconsistencies in the way her body was found. While it was clear she had been deliberately set on fire, there were also signs that suggested the fire may have been started using some form of accelerant. The fact that her body was so thoroughly burned, while the surrounding landscape appeared largely untouched, only deepened the mystery. Who would go to such lengths to conceal her identity? And why? As investigators began to look deeper into the woman's movements, they uncovered a strange pattern. Her travels seemed to take her not only to remote locations in Norway, but also to countries in Europe, including Belgium, Germany, and France. The names she used when booking her hotels were consistently false or inconsistent. There was no sign that she had any family, friends, or connections to anyone in Norway. She was as if she had appeared from nowhere, yet her existence seemed deliberate, almost planned. There was also an unsettling sense of urgency surrounding her travels. It was clear that she wasn't simply a traveler or a tourist. She was moving with purpose. But what was that purpose? Why had she been so careful to cover her tracks? Why had she traveled in such secrecy? The case took another bizarre turn when the police discovered that the woman had been in contact with multiple intelligence agencies. Some speculated that she could have been a spy, and the lack of concrete evidence or an identity seemed to point in that direction. Her use of false names and aliases, her ability to travel across Europe without any obvious connections or records, suggested a level of expertise that pointed to something more than a simple case of a mysterious traveler. Could she have been a covert agent working for a foreign government? Was she part of an intelligence operation that had gone wrong? There were also whispers in the dark corners of the investigation that perhaps the woman was involved in something far more dangerous than espionage. Some suggested that she might have been caught in the crossfire of a secret criminal organization, or that her death had been the result of a botched deal or a personal vendetta. But these theories, while compelling, were never substantiated by any solid evidence. To this day, no one knows for sure who the Isdal woman really was. Several theories have been put forward, each with its own set of plausible explanations. Some believe she was a spy, either from the Soviet Union or another foreign power, operating under the radar during a time when Cold War tensions were high. Others suggest she was a woman involved in international crime, perhaps a member of a smuggling ring or an underground network. There are even theories that she might have been a victim of a larger conspiracy, a woman who stumbled upon something she wasn't meant to see. Despite the various theories, one thing remains clear. The Isdal woman's identity remains a mystery. In 1971, a police sketch of her face was released, but it only led to more questions as no one came forward to identify her. Over the years, various attempts have been made to solve the mystery, including DNA analysis and modern forensic techniques. Yet, despite these advances, the case remains unsolved. The Isdal woman's missing past is an enigma, one that seems to slip further out of reach with each passing year. The most unsettling aspect of this case is that, in many ways, it feels like it's been intentionally left unsolved. Could the Isdal woman have been someone with powerful connections who ensured that her story would remain buried? Or was she simply an ordinary person who, for reasons unknown, found herself caught in extraordinary circumstances? The lack of a clear identity, the strange and cryptic details of her life, and the attempts to erase any trace of her existence leave us with more questions than answers. Why would someone go to such extreme lengths to hide their true identity? Was the Isdal woman simply a casualty of a life she was trying to escape? Or was she caught up in something far more sinister? The clues are scattered, the theories abundant, but the truth remains elusive. The mystery of the Isdal woman's identity continues to haunt those who study her case, and as new generations attempt to uncover the secrets buried in her past, one question continues to linger. What or who was she running from? As we turn the page from the elusive past of the Isdal woman, we venture into another strange and mysterious chapter of maritime history. A story that begins on the rolling waves of the Arctic Ocean, a place known for its icy expanse and unyielding silence. It is here, in the cold, desolate waters north of Greenland, that we encounter one of the most intriguing tales of nautical history, the story of the ship Octavius. The year is 1775. The Octavius, a merchant ship bound for China from London, disappeared. It was a routine voyage, a ship sailing from the bustling docks of London through the icy passages of the Arctic, and then down into the warm waters of the East. By all accounts, the Octavius should have been just another ship on a familiar trade route. But something went terribly wrong. Somehow, against all expectations, the Octavius would find itself entangled in one of the most inexplicable mysteries of the high seas, a story that would echo through the annals of maritime folklore for centuries to come. The ship disappeared, and its fate was sealed in the history of the sea. That is, until it was discovered again, not years later, but decades. In 1775, the ship had vanished without a trace, leaving no survivors, no distress signals, no evidence of its whereabouts. Yet, over a decade later, the Octavius was discovered, adrift in the icy waters of the Arctic Ocean in 1789, fully intact, as though frozen in time. When a ship from the whaling fleet, the Herald, found it, the crew was shocked to find it sailing without anyone aboard. The Octavius had sailed through the frigid waters for years, all while carrying the eerie silence of a ghost ship. But even more unsettling was what was discovered within the ship's ghostly interior. The ship's discovery was not just strange because it was found at sea after such a long time, but because of what was found inside. The Octavius was not simply abandoned. Its crew was found dead, still preserved in a state of chilling preservation. The last recorded log entries were from a time long past, suggesting that the ship had been drifting for years. The crew, according to the accounts, had all perished from the extreme cold. But here's where the mystery deepens. They weren't just dead. They were frozen. The bodies were found frozen in place, as though time had come to a standstill inside the ship. The most notable and haunting aspect of the discovery was the ship's captain. It was said that he was found at his desk, his pen still poised in the air, as though he had just written the final entries in his logbook before succumbing to the freezing cold. His last words, according to legend, described the ship's drift into the Arctic wasteland, having lost its bearings somewhere along the way. But it was the eerie silence of the ship's interior, frozen in time, yet filled with the palpable sense of tragedy, that would spark the flames of countless theories and speculations about the ship's fate. Who were these people? What caused them to meet such an awful fate? And most intriguingly, what had caused the ship to drift, abandoned and unmanned, for so many years, seemingly unaffected by time itself? The mystery of the Octavius only deepens as we attempt to uncover more details. Most of what we know about the ship's discovery comes from reports and journals, many of which are contradictory or incomplete. The date of the ship's disappearance, the exact location where it was found, and even the number of people aboard are all murky, leaving us with more questions than answers. The most notable piece of evidence is the ship's logbook, found in the captain's quarters. The final entry was dated in 1775, just before the ship's sudden disappearance. The rest of the log entries, as far as we can trace, are incomplete or missing. Did the Octavius lose its bearings during an expedition through the ice fields? Did the crew's fate come from an unexpected misadventure, like being caught in the Arctic vortex? Were they victims of an unexplained catastrophe that left them frozen, yet intact, for years? There are various theories to explain the fate of the Octavius, though none have proven to be conclusive. Some suggest the crew of the ship was lost to a sudden and inexplicable freeze, a result of the intense cold and perhaps an ill-timed decision to continue navigating through the harsh Arctic waters. Others propose the idea of a ghostly curse, an otherworldly punishment for some ancient wrong. Could the crew have been cursed to sail the Arctic forever, drifting in endless silence? The supernatural theories, while tantalizing, seem to lack any hard evidence, but they have continued to find an audience among those who seek to explain the unexplained. Others have suggested that the Octavius was simply another victim of the Arctic's brutal climate and the unpredictable forces of nature. Perhaps, like so many other ill-fated ships before it, the crew's death was a consequence of exposure, illness, or even some type of shipwreck caused by the overwhelming cold. However, this doesn't explain how the ship remained afloat and intact for so many years. Why did it continue to drift without sinking, without being touched by time or decay? Moreover, there is the question of the ship's origins. Despite the many records of the Octavius's final voyage, there are very few solid details about the ship before its disappearance. Who owned it? Where had it been before it set sail from London? What kind of cargo was it carrying? These questions, too, remain largely unanswered, and some even speculate that the Octavius may have been part of a much larger mystery tied to ancient maritime trade routes, lost treasure, or secretive missions. It's also worth considering the possibility that the Octavius might not have even existed as described. Some scholars point out that much of the documentation surrounding the ship is questionable, or based on second- and third-hand accounts. Could the story of the Octavius have been embellished, distorted over time, to the point where its reality became more myth than fact? Could it have been a case of wild imagination, built upon exaggerated reports, to explain an otherwise unremarkable ship disappearance? And yet, there's the undeniable fact that something unusual did occur, something unexplainable by conventional means. Whether it was a ghost ship or a case of unrelenting nature, the ship's disappearance, and its subsequent reappearance years later, has left a lasting mark on maritime history. The legends, rumors, and unverified accounts continue to swirl around the Octavius to this day, keeping the mystery alive. The fate of the Octavius is a puzzle that still resists resolution. With missing documentation, incomplete records, and no clear explanation for the ship's eerie voyage, the true origins of this strange story remain hidden in the icy waters of the Arctic. Did the ship's crew meet their end in the most chilling of circumstances, their frozen bodies still locked in the grip of time? Or is the tale of the Octavius a grand myth, constructed over the centuries to explain the unknown? As we continue to explore the mysteries of history, it's important to remember that not all stories are meant to be solved. Some, like the tale of the Octavius, may always remain enshrouded in darkness, waiting for the right key to unlock their long-buried secrets. What happened to the Octavius, and where did it truly come from? These questions, and the eerie silence that follows them, may continue to haunt the world of maritime mystery for generations to come. As we look deeper into the strange fate of the Octavius, we must also consider the broader context of maritime exploration during the 18th century. The Arctic, with its vast, uncharted waters, was a realm of both hope and danger for sailors. Many ships ventured into these cold, unforgiving waters, driven by the promise of trade routes and the pursuit of the unknown. The Octavius, though shrouded in mystery, was not an isolated incident in this time of perilous exploration. In fact, it is part of a much larger tapestry of maritime tragedies. Ships lost to the sea, their fates sealed by the unpredictable and often lethal conditions of the Arctic. The mystery of the Octavius, therefore, may not just be a singular event, but part of a wider pattern of maritime misadventures that defy explanation. Moreover, the notion of ghost ships is a recurring theme in maritime lore. The idea of vessels appearing from nowhere, drifting without crew, and sometimes carrying eerie clues to their tragic pasts, has captured the imagination of seafarers and land dwellers alike for centuries. The Octavius fits perfectly into this tradition, its haunting presence adding another chapter to the long history of ghost ships that continue to be part of nautical mythology. From the Flying Dutchman to the Mary Celeste, the lore of lost ships and their haunted voyages persists to this day. The Octavius, however, stands out due to the peculiar and chilling nature of its discovery, frozen in time, as if trapped in an endless, frozen moment. As technology advances, the mystery of the Octavius continues to elude modern-day explorers. Some have attempted to trace its route using satellite imagery and historical records, while others have conducted deep dives into the icy waters where it was found. Yet, the answers remain elusive. Despite the best efforts of contemporary historians and maritime researchers, the true story of the Octavius still slips through our fingers like ice-cold water. Perhaps the ship's true fate will always remain hidden beneath the Arctic's frozen veil, locked away in the depths of time. In the end, the tale of the Octavius is a reminder of the many mysteries that still lie beyond the reach of our understanding. It calls to us from the icy expanse of the Arctic, a place that has long held a certain allure for adventurers and historians alike. The ship's haunting discovery is a symbol of the power of the sea, its capacity to swallow ships, preserve their secrets, and leave behind only traces for those who dare to seek them. While we may never know the full truth behind the Octavius, it continues to spark curiosity, inspire speculation, and serve as a testament to the enduring allure of maritime mystery. As we leave behind the chilling mystery of the Octavius, we now turn our attention to a realm of strange and enigmatic occurrences that took place under very different circumstances, far from the ice-bound waters of the Arctic, yet equally unfathomable in its depth. This next chapter takes us into the world of 18th century France, to the man at the heart of a hidden history, the Marquis de Puységur. In the late 1700s, amid the vibrant intellectual and philosophical currents of the Enlightenment, a lesser-known figure emerged from the shadows of history, a man whose experiments seemed to blur the line between science and mysticism. The Marquis de Puységur was a French nobleman and military officer, but it was his studies in mesmerism and his attempt to understand the strange phenomenon of the sleepwalking mind that would leave an indelible, though largely forgotten, mark on both science and the occult. Puységur's work in mesmerism was a continuation of the ideas first popularized by Franz Anton Mesmer, an Austrian physician whose theories about animal magnetism proposed that a mysterious fluid, a form of energy, could be manipulated to cure ailments. Mesmer's ideas were controversial in their day, but they sparked a wave of interest in the possibility of controlling the human mind and body through unseen forces. Mesmerism, which would later evolve into the modern field of hypnosis, captivated the imaginations of many, but it was Puységur's specific experiments that ventured into territory both unsettling and unexplained. It is here, in the misty world of 18th century Paris and its surrounding countryside, that the mystery of the Marquis de Puységur's lost experiments begins. The Marquis's work was far from traditional. Rather than focusing on therapeutic uses of mesmerism, he became interested in what he called magnetic sleep, a phenomenon where subjects could enter a deep trance-like state, effectively becoming suggestible to the power of the mesmerizer's influence. Puységur's most famous experiment, and the one that would provide the greatest insight into his theories, involved a young peasant woman named Victorine, who was said to have fallen into a deep, hypnotic trance during one of Puységur's sessions. Unlike traditional hypnotic states, Victorine was not only deeply suggestible, but also claimed to experience a different reality, one in which she could respond to questions, perform complex tasks, and even demonstrate abilities that she would never have been able to perform in a normal waking state. Victorine's extraordinary transformation, as described by Puységur, was not just an intellectual curiosity, but a profound demonstration of the unexplained power of the human mind. In her magnetic sleep, she could communicate lucidly, perform feats of strength, and seemingly lose all awareness of her normal self. Was this a case of self-deception? Or was there truly something extraordinary happening beneath the surface of human consciousness? The answer, as we will see, remains elusive. What makes Puységur's work particularly intriguing is that the experiments he conducted were not isolated events. The results, and the phenomenon of magnetic sleep, became something of a fascination for other members of the medical and intellectual communities of the time. However, it was not just the peculiar and extraordinary powers that mesmerism seemed to unlock in his subjects that made the Marquis de Puységur's work so significant. It was the profound questions about the nature of the mind and the boundaries of human consciousness that it raised. Puységur's experiments, while often dismissed by some contemporaries as fraudulent or pseudo-scientific, also generated an air of suspicion. How could a simple touch or the waving of hands over a subject's body bring about such extraordinary changes in behavior? How could an individual be made to perform incredible feats of perception and memory, to be influenced so profoundly, all while in a state of unconsciousness? In one of his experiments, Puységur documented a subject's response to magnetic sleep. The subject, a man named Jean-Pierre, was rendered completely unconscious. In this state, he was able to perform intricate mental calculations and provide information that should have been beyond his capacity in his waking state. Yet, Jean-Pierre had no recollection of these feats upon waking. It was as if his mind had been temporarily taken over by another force, one that operated beyond the realms of ordinary consciousness. Such cases hinted at the possibility that there was more to human perception and consciousness than the scientific community of the time could fully comprehend. Moreover, Puységur also reported instances where his subjects claimed to have experienced vivid visions or encounters with spirits or supernatural entities while in a trance-like state. Whether these experiences were manifestations of the mind or something more tangible remained unclear. Puységur himself was fascinated by the possibility that what was happening to his subjects could not simply be chalked up to natural phenomena, but instead suggested the presence of something mystical, something beyond the capabilities of the human mind as understood by science. Yet, as quickly as these experiments were reported, they seemed to fade from the public eye. While Puységur continued his work, the rise of skepticism, as well as the increasing focus on more rational approaches to psychology and medicine, slowly buried the intrigue surrounding his research. Puységur's theories were overshadowed by the scientific community's growing adherence to a more materialistic view of the mind. And then, almost as if forgotten, the records of his experiments began to disappear. Many of the key documents regarding his work were lost or destroyed, and the full extent of his discoveries faded from historical memory. Was it an intentional act, perhaps to distance Puységur's work from the growing influence of scientific orthodoxy? Or was it simply the result of the passage of time, with the records left in the hands of people less concerned with preserving the mysteries of the mind than with the more practical concerns of the Enlightenment era? What is even more perplexing is the fact that some of the missing records have never been found. Many have speculated that some of Puységur's original documents, perhaps even his journals detailing his experiments, were deliberately withheld or hidden, either due to their controversial nature or their perceived challenge to established views on human psychology. Could the truth behind these lost documents still be lurking in an archive somewhere, or hidden in the cryptic notes of forgotten scholars? In the absence of these records, much of what we know about the Marquis de Puységur's work comes from second-hand accounts, and these can be contradictory. Some say that Puységur was a true visionary who unlocked the secrets of the unconscious mind. Others dismiss him as a charlatan, a man who merely manipulated the power of suggestion to deceive his subjects. But when we take a closer look at his findings, one question seems to linger. Was Puységur simply a man ahead of his time, a pioneer in exploring the vast unknown territories of the human psyche? Or was he a misguided figure whose experiments crossed a dangerous line between curiosity and delusion? Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Puységur's work is the way it continues to echo through history. Hypnosis, mind control, and the concept of the human mind's ability to reach altered states of consciousness have all become deeply embedded in modern psychology and even in popular culture. Yet, Puységur's pivotal role in these developments has largely been forgotten, overshadowed by more mainstream figures and movements in psychology. The mystery surrounding Puységur's experiments and the disappearance of the most significant records continue to puzzle historians and psychologists alike. What might we have learned if those records had survived? What discoveries, hidden in the hypnotic states of Puységur's subjects, remain just beyond our reach? The Marquis de Puységur may be a forgotten figure in history, but his experiments continue to leave us questioning the boundaries of the mind. As we delve further into the depths of this 18th century enigma, one thing becomes clear. The lost experiments of the Marquis de Puységur may still be waiting to be unearthed, their secrets locked in time, waiting for the right key to unlock their truth. What did the Marquis truly discover about the human mind, and how much more do we still have yet to learn? Only time will tell. As we continue to explore the mysteries of the Marquis de Puységur's work, it becomes apparent that his legacy is far from forgotten. Despite the destruction and disappearance of key records, there remains a core of fascination surrounding his experiments. The unanswered questions about his findings and their implications for human consciousness continue to resonate with modern researchers. Could it be that some of his discoveries laid the foundation for the broader understanding of altered states of mind that would later emerge in fields like psychotherapy and neuroscience? Though his theories were lost in the winds of time, the very idea that the human mind could be influenced by external forces through mesmerism paved the way for the modern practice of hypnosis. Even today, the implications of Puységur's work remain controversial. On one hand, we have the skeptics, who argue that his experiments were nothing more than parlor tricks or manipulations of suggestion, easily dismissed by modern science. On the other hand, there are those who see Puységur as a pioneering figure whose contributions were ahead of their time, worthy of further investigation. The growing field of neuroplasticity and the exploration of the subconscious mind have begun to revisit questions that Puységur touched upon, though many of the answers still remain elusive. His theories might have been misunderstood in their time, but they now serve as a fascinating precursor to the ongoing scientific exploration of the mind's potential. Yet, perhaps the most intriguing question that continues to linger is why such significant portions of Puységur's research vanished without a trace. Was there a deliberate effort to suppress his discoveries, perhaps because they challenged the materialist worldview that was gaining ground in the Enlightenment era? Or was the loss simply a consequence of the transience of intellectual history, with his findings lost to the shifting tides of philosophical and scientific trends? Either way, the mystery of the missing records serves as a reminder of how easily knowledge can be lost, or intentionally obscured, through the passage of time. In the end, the story of the Marquis de Puységur remains as enigmatic as his experiments. Though much of his work has faded from the public eye, the questions he raised about the nature of consciousness, the influence of external forces on the mind, and the untapped potential of human perception continue to intrigue scholars and laypeople alike. Whether his research is ever fully rediscovered or remains locked in the mists of time, it is clear that Puységur's legacy is far from over. As we continue to push the boundaries of human knowledge, his forgotten experiments may one day provide the missing link to unlocking the deepest mysteries of the mind.